You are listening to the Alouettes Flight Deck.
All right, folks, we've been cleared for takeoff.
I'm gonna be iconic. Yeah! I'm gonna be iconic. Say you wanna make it on your own.
And welcome to the Alouettes Flight Deck, podcast dedicated to Montreal Alouettes football, presented by our good friends over at Royal Retros, where you don't need a time machine in order to get some sweet, sweet throwback merch. Head over to royalretros.com, use the code FlightDeck at checkout, and you will save 10% off your entire order. I'm Tim Capper. You can find me on X or Blue Sky over at Repact. That's REPPACT.
And I'm Cliffy D. You can also find me on X and on Blue Sky over at Cliffy D.
That's right. Back to the old school Cliffy D intro for reasons.
Oh, big reasons. Massive reasons.
Yeah, big 300 reasons.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can think about 300 reasons why we want to do this properly.
Exactly. We always try to celebrate milestones here at the Alouettes Flight Deck on the show. And this is a big one. 300 is a big number. It's bigger than 2, and it's bigger than 100, obviously.
Mm.
And we try to go big and bold. And by God, we went big and bold. This is going to be an episode dedicated specifically to this interview. It's not the season finale by any means.
Nope.
We have another one, or minimum one, maximum 2 shows coming up after that. So stay tuned.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a big one. And this is a gentleman that we tease a little bit. There's lore about this, and we talk about how big this number is. There's lore behind it on how this thing got done and how it almost didn't get done, and then it got done. So, needless to say, speaking with this gentleman who is Montreal Alouettes football, if it wasn't for this man being a part of the CFL, it is very possible that the Alouettes would not be what they were today. We were lucky enough to be speaking with former Alouettes GM, head coach, and many other titles that he had. I'm sure I can only imagine the size of his business card, the one and the only Jim Popp. And it was just, I can't wait for everybody to hear this. I know Cliff doesn't like it when I say it's a long form interview. This one really is, but it's on purpose. Sometimes you want to be able to, Cliff, to be able to edit certain things out. But with all honesty, this type of interview that we had with Jim, you really couldn't leave anything out because there's so much context to not only to Jim, his career, and so much information that we learned about former Alouettes owner Bob Wetenall and everybody else in between. Again, I think you'll agree with me when I say this long form interview is going to be well worth it.
Without question. And you said it. We try to do it up big for these landmark episodes. I mean, for the 100th episode, we were blessed to have Ben Cahoon on. Absolutely fantastic. Episode 200, we had SJ Green on. A sensational interview as well. And I think this one is going to go up there, right up there with it. And yeah, it's a long one, folks. But I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Jim Popp has been a part of this Alouettes organization for 20 plus years. I mean, he's been in the CFL even longer. I mean, this guy's got story upon story upon story, and all incredibly fascinating. I mean, he's lived several lifetimes in his tenure here in Montreal. It's remarkable. So, I mean, sometimes the best thing to do is just turn on the mic and say, let her rip. And that's exactly what Jim did. And we're so thankful that he was able to join us. Again, you do an episode like this, you got to bring out the big guns. You got to really, bring the wow factor. And I think once this is done, folks, you're going to be wow. You're going to be blown away by just the knowledge, the absolute knowledge, the insight, everything that Jim shared with us. And we were so fortunate to be able to say, yeah, we got to talk to Jim Popp. We got to let him share his story, share his perspective of things on all things Alouettes and even more. I mean, it's truly remarkable. So this is one hell of an episode, folks. And one thing I will say is, again, it is long, and I'm not kidding when I say it's long. I mean, if you haven't already, like, go use the washroom, grab a drink, maybe grab a meal.
Just put on headphones. You got to put on headphones and go soak in the tub, because it's a good listen. It's a good listen. Or go for a run, go for whatever it is that you do when it comes to listening to the podcast. You know what? Hey, how about this? If you happen to be an Alouettes fan and you may be coming up to Montreal, there's 3 hours right there on your trip. You can't go wrong. Can't go up and back to Ottawa. How about that?
There you go. I mean, that's it. In any event, yeah, it's a bit of a doozy. It's a bit of a long one, but trust me, folks, I'll say it's well worth your time to give this a proper listen.
I agree with you. And last thing before we get to the interview with Jim, it was obviously, as I said before, it was something that Cliff and I almost had to pivot away from. We will sooner or later tell the story. Maybe we'll tell it next episode. But I can say also that for this to occur in our 10th broadcast season, chef's kiss for this to occur right near the end of the season, right near the end of the broadcast season. And we're lucky. We're just very blessed for it to occur when it did. So I will say this. That's all I will say. So without further ado, sit down, grab a drink, and let's listen and speak to former Alouettes general manager, Jim Popp.
Wow. Episode 300. And when we came out, they said we wouldn't last a week. Well, who's laughing now? We are so excited for our 300th episode. We had to bring out a big guest. We had to bring out the big guns. And quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure I can speak for Tim on this, there's no bigger gun right now as far as, when you talk about the history of this Montreal Alouettes franchise ever since they moved here in 1996 from Baltimore. This man that we're about to introduce has seen it all. He's been through it all. He's experienced it all. He truly has. And I will say, he is the architect of this Montreal Alouettes team that you know and love. We are so excited this evening. We are joined by, for our 300th episode, none other than former, let me run down the list, general manager, head coach, director of player personnel, director of football operations. Did I miss any titles, Jim? This is Jim Popp, ladies and gentlemen.
There's a lot of titles there. A lot of titles.
Great champ.
Well, but no, a lot of that had to do with just simply when people ask questions, who do they speak to? So it was a great time.
Oh, well, listen, we were so excited. I mean,
yeah.
We talk about the history of this team, this Alouettes team. It pretty much starts with you. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, from the moment this team came here from Baltimore, I mean, all the way up until 2016, I should say, like, you were the Montreal Alouettes. I mean, it's an incredible story, and we're so excited to be able to share that with you, or have you share that with us this evening.
No, I appreciate Cliff and Tim. Thank you so much for having me on. It's, I love being a part of the CFL history. I love being a part of the Montreal history when we restarted the team back and were able to do the great accomplishments, the different things that we did. And there's a lot of stories, a lot of different stories that go with all of this. And, but, having great ownership, I mean, to be honest, to even be able to come to Montreal and Jim Spears owned the team and, the confidence he had in me. And then, when Mr. Wettenhall took over to retain me, to keep me there, which he didn't have to. And, and the relationship that I built with him until, days came that he just couldn't operate from the day to day like he did, as much as he stayed and lived in Montreal. People don't even realize how much he was in Montreal each year, even though he wasn't seen maybe until game day sometimes. But a lot of things always start at the top, and, being able to function to have success. And I was a young man getting great opportunities, and you kind of earn your stripes, and you build confidence, and you trust one another. And that was the great working relationship that I had the majority of the time I was there. And a lot of people didn't sometimes understand how sometimes things went, but and it wasn't for public talk, but it was an astonishing place to work, and it was a great atmosphere. My family was treated very well, and I never, matter of fact, you get too comfortable sometimes. You kind of feel like you're part of the family, and that's kind of how I was treated or told. You are part of our family, and I had plenty of chances to leave, and I didn't leave, and it was hard to leave because of the enjoyment that I had, from that job, and that became more important to me, and making sure my family was, things were going well, than it was to chasing bigger jobs. But I really had no interest in ever leaving Montreal, and Mr. Wettenhall knew this, and unless I got a direct job as a general manager in the NFL, or if there was a special job in Charlotte, where I'm from the area of Charlotte, and or maybe in Baltimore, where my wife's from, and then we spent a couple years, but outside of that, it was really a GM job. And if I wasn't that, then I wasn't going to leave. But every chance I had to interview for a job, I'd always go directly to Mr. Wettenhall. We'd talk about it. It wasn't leverage. I'd just let him know. And he'd go, well, you need to go interview. And I'd be like, yeah, but I'm not going to take the job. And he goes, but you should go interview. You'll regret it if you don't. And that's how we had a relationship. So, we went through everything. So, that's why the job was so enjoyable.
It's like they say, though, that the grass isn't necessarily greener on the other side. The grass is greenest where you water it. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be a fair assessment to sort of your time in Montreal, would you say?
Yeah, well, yes. And, when people, when you put so much hard work into everything you do, and I was part of the creation of starting it from absolute scratch, even going back to Baltimore, absolute scratch. We had to come back and start over again in Montreal, absolute scratch. And it's like watching a child grow up. And, you want to see it grow up. You want to see it mature and have success. And not just that, it's the people who join the fight in the work effort, and all the different people that I was a part of hiring, and seeing them have great success. And, and I always would try to tell them, like, you're with a successful franchise, success breeds. And, if you do well, there'll be opportunities for you. And then to watch several of these people go on and have great jobs, whether it's they've become head coaches and, general managers or player personnel directors, or go to the NFL and get into high position jobs in the NFL. That's a tremendous enjoyment for me, let alone all the players that you have a hand in and changing their lives. They do their part, we do our part. I try not to get too close to them. Sometimes that, it's a business mind, but I wanted them to treat them extraordinarily well. The longer they're with you, the better relationships you have with them, or they understand the type of relationships you have with them. But, they perform. You try to take care of them. It's very difficult to ever get rid of any of them, even if your hands are being forced, and or if, their best days are gone. They're difficult situations, but it doesn't mean you don't care and love for them. And, and I have tremendous relationships with a lot of players, and that, and they've come back to us, twofold, whether it's coaches, myself, years later, and as they mature and they have families and they realize how special it was in Montreal. It's not normal. And that's what I would always tell the staff every year. This isn't normal. So don't take it for granted. And, in the calendar year, January through December, every year is very similar, but you got to basically start over and do it again, especially if you don't win a championship, do it again. And we really had it rolling for a long time.
Yeah, that's true. And, people may not know that you first had before you were going to Baltimore and then coming here with the team, you had a cup of coffee with the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Yeah.
What what drew you specifically to your first job in the CFL? For those who don't know, I think you're a wide receivers coach, if I'm not mistaken.
I went there. I
What,
went there as a wide receiver coach and the director of player personnel. So I had a dual role. Yeah, the way that came about, I didn't know a whole lot about the CFL other than like most people in the U.S. is watching it on ESPN when they were filling time and when ESPN started and CFL was on TV. And obviously I'm a football nut, so I'm watching that. But like the ambition to come to Canada, so I was part of World League of American Football. Montreal had a team at the time, which turned into NFL Europe. But I was with Roman Gabriel, the great, Hall of Fame quarterback, and and I was with him in Raleigh, Durham, and our team lasted one season. George Shinn owned the team, who owned the Charlotte Hornets NBA team, and the NFL took the team from him. We were all out of a job. I learned about a new. This is kind of how my career's gone. I learned about a new football league starting called the Professional Spring Football League. I learned it through the USA Today. I applied for it. Just happens to be somebody that was helping them put their league together knew me. Get a call. You want to come up as a consultant? Well, this is how I got into personnel. I go up to the Meadowlands. I'm living across from Giant Stadium. I'm working with all these NFL people working on this new league. And they liked what I did. And I put together a whole league of personnel. I signed over 1,000 players and went to a draft. We drafted 10 teams. I had 100 players. And this is how I knew players. But while I was doing that, we were running camps across the U.S. And we had a camp at North Texas. And we had 650 players at this camp for a one-day tryout. And the next day we had a camp in Tampa, Florida, who had over 1,000 players. We flew that night. It was crazy. And, but there was no spring football being played, and people wanted to play. But Dan Rambo happened to be at that tryout in North Texas. And he yells at me over the stands like, "Hey, Jim," didn't know the guy. "I'm really impressed how you're organized. It's so organized, but things don't work out. Here's my card. Call me." Well, months later, when we find out this isn't going to fly, we already been in training camp practicing for 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden the doors are closing. I call him, and he's like, and I had no idea he had left Saskatchewan to go to Ottawa to be a GM. I didn't know any of this. And he's like, "Well," he goes, "I don't have a job, but I know a team that needs somebody. Let me call the general manager," which was Al Ford. So 48 hours later, Al's calling me. And it's like, "Hey, I want to introduce you to our head coach, Don Matthews." Well, Don was in World League of American Football. We didn't know each other, but he spent a season with Orlando. And next thing you know, he came to Saskatchewan, so he was already there. And so he says, "Hey, you want to come up here for an interview?" Sure. So I get on a plane. I had no idea where I was going. I fly, and I got more stories that I won't go into. I fly in there. I spend 3 days interviewing. I mean, they grilled me. And I was young, and they're like, and I find this years later through Bob Price, Daryl Adralin, who was part of taking care of me with Don Matthews. But I get off a plane, first thing Don, you know how Don was. He was the renegade that had basically had a mullet, was driving a Harley at the time. He's in jeans. I'm in a suit, and he's like, "You're too dressed up for me." And I laughed, and I'm like, "Well, if I'd have known, I would have." I said, "I didn't know." So I spend 3 days there grilling me, and then I go home without the job offer. And a week later, they call me and they're like, "You want the job?" Sure. And so packed a U-Haul up, all my belongings. I drove 3 days, 12 hours a day to Regina. That was the start of my CFL career. And coached receivers, which I had a Hall of Fame receiving corps. Ken Austin's the quarterback, Ray Elgard, Jeff Fairholm, Don Narcisse. This is who I'm coaching. And so, and I'd been a coach all the way up to this point, other than starting that new football league. And so I'm doing personnel, and they're like, how do you know all this stuff, at your age and all this? I said, "Well, I put a whole football league together." I said, "I've met all these agents. I've tested all these players. This is how I know all these people." And it was just a fast track to learning. So as I've always said, when Jim Popp came in, the greatest thing I ever did was listen. My teachers were the greatest teachers I could have ever had, and Al Ford, who's probably one of the nicest men you'll ever meet, and a tremendous smart businessman, and Don Matthews from the football side, who knew the league like the back of his hand, and I just had to listen. So we're there 2 years. We quickly turned that around, made them into a very good team and playoff team, and then they were able to carry that on. But after 2 seasons, expansion happened, and there were job openings, and Don was the hot commodity. He's ready to leave Saskatchewan. As he never stayed anywhere very long, and he's like, wherever I go, you're going. And I'm like, okay, and so first he's in Vegas, next thing he's in Baltimore, and so I'm flying in and I'm meeting, and he's going to be Don Matthews, head coach and director of football operations. I'm going to be the general manager. And at first we were going to Vegas, and the next thing you know, he goes, I'm not going to Vegas. He goes, I met Jim Spiros. He goes, I think Baltimore's the spot. Go in, meet Jim. Jim was a young man, owner, had won a Super Bowl, been with the Redskins, won a national championship as a college football player. And it was exciting being in Baltimore, and so, long story short, we put that sucker together quick. I had all the players and ready to roll, and and it was a great spot to see a lot of players and constantly upgrade our team and have a powerhouse team, that turned into what a lot of these Hall of Famers are, and people that carried on, even some coming to, we picked up some CFL guys and then ended up in Montreal and built that up too. But that's the crazy thing. So when we left Baltimore, Don wasn't going to go to Montreal. He didn't have any interest in going to Montreal. He never thought it would work. And he knew we all knew Doug Flutie was going to Toronto. We knew all that on the inside. And he's like, I'm going to Toronto. And so Don asked me to come to Toronto 2 years in a row to be the GM. And, after 1 year, they got rid of the GM. They asked me to come in again, and I didn't do it either year. And I'm like, no, I'm going to stay here. And this is after Spiros was the owner 1 year, and then Wettenhall bought it. And he thought I was the craziest person. And I'm like, I might have been one of the most naive people at the time, that whether it was ever going to work. But again, it was like I loved the startup and the new and and caring and bringing it along and staying up all night. And I'm and years later, obviously Don joins us, right? But it was a phenomenal time, and look back on it and easily write a book about a lot of this stuff and all the things that went on. And but it was quite a opportunity for me, and quite captivating, the people that accepted me and allowed me to build things.
Now, I've called it Baltimore versus everybody else. As you said, for your first of 2 teams that you had to create from scratch.
Yeah.
For you coming in from Saskatchewan and then learning, because of the way that the rules were within the U.S. and Canada, that there wouldn't be no ratio. Were you just foaming at the mouth, knowing that who you could potentially get on your franchise? What was your initial reaction when you heard that you would not have to abide by the ratio that the other Canadian teams did have to go by?
Well, first, I don't think we ever looked at it that way. We tried to gather experienced CFL people. We made a very precise decision between our coaching staff and the players, some of the original cornerstone players, that we were going to gather guys who understood the league, and we were going to do it the right way. It was going to be done the CFL way in regards to how to build a team and the players, whether we were mandated to have, or weren't allowed to have, basically, Canadians, to be honest. And, but I don't think we ever looked at it, because the reality is the teams, and this played a huge role in not even winning the Grey Cup the first year. I mean, or having a 12-6 record the first year. The teams who had established teams and had established Canadian offensive lines and guys that played together for years had a huge advantage. When you're bringing in new people, no matter how talented they are, and they don't understand, they're playing people are a yard off the ball. You know, it's just not the same. Trying to keep them bonded, from a team that's never played together. I mean, but having guys, like Tracy Ham, is an example, help cement the glue of the new and rookie players, and then the emergence of a guy like Mike Pringle in year one, who nobody wanted, and I don't mean that in a mean way with Mike, but Mike originally started in Edmonton and then he ended up in Sacramento, in the World League of American Football. And then I'm doing a trade and, it's one of the great trades. I didn't know what I was trading for. It was one of the great trades. Okay. I already had Sheldon Canley on our team, who was number 1 or 2 in the nation coming out of college as a all-purpose back. Mike Pringle was number 2, or he was number 1. They were flipping categories. And I'm like, well, if I can get Mike Pringle and I get the 2 guys that, 2 years ago were both the number 1 and 2 guy in the nation coming out of college, why wouldn't we take him? He was a throw-in into a trade. And we were trading a DB for a receiver. And they're like, well, do you want Mike Pringle? And I remember us having a discussion. And I'm like, well, we're not, lighting it up, with what we have early in the season. Let's take on Mike Pringle. And so we get Mike, and it wasn't until, and I'm talking before we even actually started playing again, but it wasn't until like the 3rd game of the season, Mike actually got to start, I think, or maybe the 4th game. And boy, he never looked back. I mean, he almost rushed for 2,000 then, in a short period of time. And you realize what Mike was, and then you realize the tandem with him and Tracy. Tracy needed a guy like that. And they needed each other, but Tracy could, was a mentor with Mike, and that play action along with, having the core of guys that we end up having, turned out to be phenomenal. And, but it just got better and better and better. Who knows what it'd have been in year 3. We should have never lost the Grey Cup year 1, year 2. We won the last 13 in a row, and still to this day, 30 years later, there's never been a team that's won 18 games. It's the only team in the CFL that's ever won 18 games in the course of a season, regular season and playoffs together. That's the only team. And and then we had 14 guys go off that team straight to the NFL, which at that time was unheard of and still has never matched in the CFL. But, it was quite a group, and then it all fell apart. There was only, I think, 10 guys that actually came to Montreal from that team directly. And then we had to rebuild it again. But a lot of those guys who were with Baltimore and after they had left or free agents or went to the NFL, all wanted to stay together. They wanted, and that's why they came back to Montreal. And they wanted to be together because they had such a great time. And it was a wonderful time. So then we started rebuilding, and we had, even though we didn't get to the Grey Cup the first 4 years in Montreal, we had really good teams. I mean, we were winning 12 or more games each year, and we were finding somewhat crazy way not to win the division championship. Not the first year. I think, Toronto smacked us pretty good, but, the next 3 years, I think 97, 8, and 9, we lost like heartbreakers, like in the last minute of the game in all 3 before we, actually Anthony, his first year as a true, the number 1 guy, we went to the Grey Cup, and then, and then there was eight of them, so it was quite an unbelievable run. But it was, but we had very good teams through that period of time.
I'll say. And talk to us about the actual experience of being in Baltimore itself, because I hear conflicting reports all the time. The fans that loved CFL football absolutely loved it with everything they had. To them, it was their team. It replaced the Baltimore Colts, and to the point where the team even tried to go by the name Baltimore Colts.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was, it was like, what you can compare it to is when the Alouettes went away, and there was 10 years of Alouettes lore and history, and especially when they had great teams before they became the Concords, but, all those great teams, and the guys that were all stars, for that team were still stars, right? They were folklore in Montreal. That's how Baltimore was. So you had the history of the Colts, and we we're in Memorial Stadium, which was used as a baseball and football, but Johnny Unitas is around. Some of the great players are still around, live in Baltimore, and they're still the stars of the city for football. And then we come in to start playing. Some of those people accepted us and jumped right on board. Some of them, you could tell, it irritated them a little bit because you're taking a little bit of their thunder. And but a lot of them actually embraced us in those 2 years as we built it up. But yeah, they tried to use the Colts name or go CFL Colts, and it was blocked. And then and then we didn't even have a name for part of the time the first year, and then year 2 it became the Stallions, and which was a great name, and logo, everything all stayed the same. But being in Baltimore with the history of the team and us playing in that historic stadium, and then the Baltimore band, if you ever know the history of that, was still together. Even it was 10 years later, they're playing at the band's still together in a Ravens uniform. But great, just crazy stuff. And they, it's a very family oriented culture that they had. The Colt. What it really was, there was almost a fan group. It's almost like Boy Scout group over here and a Boy Scout group, but it was a Colt, and then it became a Stallion group all over the city. But each group of people, community, would take on a player, and that was their player, and they treated them like their son, and that was the culture. It was an unbelievable culture of just the organization, people getting along. After, we won a lot, but after the games, we'd all go eat at the same restaurant. We were at this restaurant that would turn in, have a dance floor, baby, dance, have a good time, and then they'd go their own merry way, and we'd start over another week. And but it became such a close knit group of people in that 2 years. It was abnormal, but that starts with the people there and the culture, but like building that up. And then of course baseball went on strike during that period of time. And actually our crowds got affected. You would think it'd go up, it actually went down, when baseball strike. And it's crazy to think that, but great thing that came out of that is we got to travel charter, which because all the charters became free because they're baseball, they're like, okay, we'll give it to you for X, and it was cheap. But we built such a fan base that it actually spurred on the city, and Mr. Modell was ready to move the team out of Cleveland. So Baltimore was the destination. And then fortunate for Montreal, to be honest, that Mr. Spiros decided we're going to go to Montreal and restart the team and start a team up there. And that's, I'll never forget the day. I mean, all my stuff. So he's like, "Hey, I'm coming to pick your stuff up, and we're going to Montreal." And I'm like, "What?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm gonna pack your stuff, and we're going to Montreal." I said, "All right." And I didn't see my stuff for a year. I lived in a hotel. He got stuck at the border. I never saw I had to rebuy clothes and everything. I lived out of a hotel room for 1 year, and without my own belongings. It cost me money, but it was well worth it. That's another story.
These are great. And I want to ask you, up until that point, you've been in other leagues, you'd started other leagues, you started another team. What was it like winning your first Grey Cup, Jim? I mean, you're such a young guy at the time, second year as a GM, really. What was your reaction to winning the Grey Cup? Beside the thing about being the first American team to win the Grey Cup, that doesn't, that's what it was. But for you, what was it like for you, your experience winning the Grey Cup for the very first time?
Yeah, I mean, well, I come out of college. I'm trying to think just off the top of my head, like actually winning any kind of championship like that, but not that big. But obviously once I started college coaching, and then I went into different pro leagues, and you hadn't won a championship like that. There were some rough periods of time through there. So when you start building something that is special and it's special, And then that game that we won might to this day be some of the most collective talent ever on a Grey Cup field between the two teams. Both teams are 17-3, tons of Hall of Famers. And we from the way we lost the year before and knew we shouldn't have lost, or, and some of the controversy that went with it, but we lost. And we were determined to win. And we hadn't had great success at that point in 2 seasons with Calgary. I mean, our guys came out to play and they played a phenomenal game. It was a beatdown and we dominated. And in that moment, that was just unbelievable. It was a great feeling, to ever win a championship. They all are when you win. And then you're hopping on a plane, you're going back, and the crazy thing is that we never got to celebrate that. We come off a bus. There's people everywhere. People used to meet us at the airport in Baltimore, but we got in the middle of a day, from Saskatchewan and Regina, and then we went straight to the Inner Harbor downtown, and they had a little small guy, get together to the mayor, and here's the championship. Last time we were ever together. That was it. The team was done. We're moving. And never got to have a parade or celebration or all together. We all got together 5 years ago really quick because TSN, ESPN wanted to do a special on 25th anniversary. But, I'd say 2/3 of the team couldn't be there because it was done so quickly. It was done very well, but it was done so quick. Here the 30th year was this year, I think. And we wasn't even talked about getting together. But the sad thing is, it's not really recognized. That's the sad part, and really, whether people want to associate it to, it is associated to the Alouettes. It's part of it, and it should be recognized because it was part of the history of absolutely keeping the CFL afloat. CFL might not have been afloat if they didn't expand and go to the U.S. and were generating money from the teams down there and what they're doing. But, the one thing that was done properly, the Baltimore Stallions was done the right way. It was built the right way. It wasn't built to try to change the league. It wasn't built to be different than the CFL historically has been built. And I think, that's part of I think all the people that have always come from Baltimore, did come from Baltimore for a long time to the Grey Cup, people accepted them because they accepted the CFL for what and how the history of it. And it's, it's always been a part of, I stand there with a chip on my shoulder. Anybody that ever played for the Stallions, they all do. All the great players, because they know that no one wants to really acknowledge them, or some people don't want to acknowledge. Let's put it that way. And they want to put a little asterisk next to it, but it's not, it's what it is. And, but yeah, there's a lot that goes to winning. I don't care, because there was a lot of other U.S. teams that didn't come close to playing or accomplish anything that was done with that team, to ever do what it did.
Last time I checked, Jim, Baltimore Stallions plate is still on the Grey Cup. So
it's a special plate. It's a special place for all of us. I mean, we still see one another, and I see Jim Spiros, at least once, 2-3 times a year, and and he's still, whether he had to give the team up or not, he's still diehard. He's very proud. He's of the CFL. Everybody that was associated to it is, and and even though some of those players all came back and played for Montreal or other teams, they'll probably, most of them would tell you what is the most special CFL team you ever played for, and I would say almost all of them would tell you the Baltimore Stallions. Yeah.
By the way, I thought it was pretty ironic or pretty cool that you win your first championship in the same city that you started your CFL career.
Yeah. Well, it's it will not start my CFL because my career was started in Saskatchewan.
Oh, didn't you win the Grey Cup in Saskatchewan?
No, we didn't win the Grey Cup there. We were in the playoffs for 2 years. Yeah, so we didn't win it, but that's where I started my career. Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah.
I started my career there, but we didn't win but we won the Grey Cup, Baltimore Grey Cup in Saskatchewan. Yes,
that's what I meant. Sorry, that's what I meant. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. So no. That those type of ties, yes. I mean, it's really something. So that was a very special thing for me to come back. But it's funny. There's a lot of Saskatchewan people because of, I wasn't the mainstream person. I was the director player person. Some people don't even know I was in Saskatchewan, or doing what I was doing at the time. And because it was a quick 2 seasons, before I was leaving and going to Baltimore. But yes, so I apologize for that. And
that's okay.
No, I Saskatchewan's always had a little soft spot in my heart, because of the people I know there to this day. A lot of the people that are still associated, in some way, alumnus and everything, back to the Rough Riders. And but no matter where I've worked before, obviously you go win a Grey Cup and you're playing against those type of, or being in those cities or playing for against those teams, and you want to win. No matter who your friends are, you're not friends that day, So.
Friends off for 3 hours.
Yeah,
we'll exactly.
Talk later. We'll have a beer later if you want to have one. Yeah.
So we know you said you basically started the team in Montreal again in '96 when you moved up. One thing I wanted to ask you, Jim, if you're allowed to comment on it, and I can hear how close you are with Jim Spiros. The Jim in Montreal, there were 2 Jims that people liked. It was the Jim bringing the Alouettes back, and then there was the Jim Spiros when he left. Are you able to? Can you tell us something about Jim Spiros that fans from '96 should know about him? Because as I said, they know him as an owner in '96 bringing the team, but then they saw he was the face. And I've learned this now, that if you're the face of something, whether you are the top person or not, you may always get the flack, or you always may get the press, positive or negative. But is there anything about Jim Spiros you can tell Owls fans that's something that they may not know about him?
Well, there were 2 owners. So Michael Gelfand.
Michael Gelfand, yes.
Michael Gelfand, Dr. Michael Gelfand, was very wealthy, and he was in the Washington, D.C. area, but he wasn't the face. Jim was. Jim was the president also. Jim's a real go-getter. Jim is so positive, that it's going to work and accomplish, whether it is or isn't, he believes it is. That's how Jim is. And, he's an entrepreneur. He's had great success. He's rebuilt himself several times. He owns restaurants. He's had several things that have had great success. And he was a true believer that things were going to be done. He, to this day, he dresses sharp. He speaks elegantly. He works his tail off. I've been invited to be a part of a panel and guest at Clemson University, because he's a huge Clemson alumnus, where he won a national championship and with their entrepreneurship, and I'm part of that. And he doesn't have to invite me to do that. But as we go along and you age and you're together and you have up and down times, and you appreciate one another because you helped one another. You've been through tough times with one another. And what people, the amount of money, the big money, Mike Gelfand was that person, and coming into Montreal, even when we did, it was late. And that first year, I think we only had 1,500 season ticket holders playing in Olympic Stadium. Yeah. 1,500 playing in a 60,000 seat arena. And, Jim was bold at times. He I think even one time he guaranteed a win. And if not, you can buy a ticket for $1 the next day. Now we won. you know, and so it was tough sledding, you know, trying to get people on board. And I can remember my first year. I'm in the office hour upon hour upon hour, late night, and you know, people are hired to work, and because of the laws of working, you know, people would not work more than 8 or 9 hours. That was it. I mean, they weren't allowed to, or they had to be paid overtime. You know, all the laws of what they were. And I'm like, I can remember having discussions with people, and I'm like, this will never work if that's all you're going to work, or they weren't going to work on the weekends. And I mean, my wife would stay up all night with me, and because I didn't have a staff, it was just me. It was just me doing personnel. There was nobody else. It was a coaches and myself. And she would stay up with me all night, and you know, trying to help get stuff completed, because there was only so much that could be done, or the amount of money to pay people. And you know, there went through tough times. I mean, I know the league asked for help. I mean, the team asked for help from the league, and it just went back and forth. And even from the day that Mr. Wettenhall took over, I mean, I would say within 48 hours of that, you know, Jim's talking to me and like, this is, you know, this other partner's coming in, and then we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. And then next thing you know, it wasn't happening, you know, but like, you know, I can't speak on behalf of Jim Spiros or anything that went on in regards to business deals, or anything that was being done, or what was talked about or said that would happen. And I can tell you his intentions or anything like that. I can promise you that he had every intention that it would work. And I do think when Mr. Wettenhall came in and the discussions with Jim, you know, Mr. Wettenhall, whoever was told X, Y, and Z, he made every effort to keep those relationships with those people and to take care of them, and let's move forward. And so, yeah, because I think Jim and Mr. Gelfand were part of bringing Mr. Wettenhall in. I don't think people realize that he was going to be a partner, and then he ended up, or the league allowed him to take over completely. But but it was Jim Spiros and Mr. Gelfand that actually brought Mr. Wettenhall into the mix.
I think that's something new. So is it fair to say then, Jim, that Spiros was treated poorly in the press? Because as I said, this is coming from somebody who's been following the team since '96. You read one side of it. Do you think that the press treated him fairly?
Listen, I don't even remember any of what was said. All I can tell you is that the intentions of people to do the right thing were all there. There wasn't anybody trying to pull the wool over people's eyes.
Right.
You know, the reality is, if Mr. Spiros would have never brought the team to Montreal, there wouldn't have been another Alouettes. That's the reality. I wouldn't have had a job there to work and help build a dynasty. It wouldn't have existed. Mm-hmm. And so the vision of wanting to do something great and give that opportunity, let's start from scratch and go from, and take a team back to Montreal, which I'm sure was the vision of the CFL period from a league office perspective, and to have more teams, especially when the teams were retracting from the U.S., to at least try to have 10 teams if it was possible. We really never have had a 10-team league, right? It's always been 9 or 8, where it was up to 13, but never just a 10-team league. But that was the part of the growth, is to put a team back there that had success at one time. And so I can honestly, sit here and say, if Mr. Spiros would have never had that dream or brought his money along with Mr. Gelfand being a supporter of that, there would never have been a team in Montreal.
Yeah.
Whether it worked with them or not, it did also bring along Mr. Wettenhall, who was able to sustain that for over 20 years, which people don't even begin to understand how much money that he spent out of his own pocket to most people couldn't have endured something like that. Most owners, it wouldn't have never lasted. He was one of the great owners, and but
No,
like
I
Mr. Spiros
agree.
also created one of the great teams ever in Baltimore, and he got started one of the next great teams of the Montreal Alouettes. So that should be his history, to be honest, for Jim Spiros.
No, it's fair. It's fair. As I said, it gives alone the tidbits you mentioned, Jim, just alone about how uh how Mr. Wetnall came in. I don't know if that was ever reported. So
Yeah.
that's a huge part that ties Jim, and I'll say, into my good graces, because
Yeah.
as I said, I was on the fence with Jim Spiros, with all honesty, but over the years I've mellowed. But it does mean a lot now knowing just that.
Yeah.
And you're talking about 96 also. Talk about some of the challenges. Was there any one particular challenge other than not having a staff that really stands out for that first year?
I think just, to be honest, when we started football back in Montreal, at the time, everybody would always be like the English and the French. The French don't accept the football, and only the English side, and we're all working together, English and French together, working together, right? And just trying to build that whole prospect, and then the stay in school program, or promoting all the high school stuff once which I think probably was one of the true things that Larry Smith was a big part of, is helping build that. But and then football took off. So when the French media or a lot of the French reporters would talk to us, it was very refreshing, because they weren't know-it-alls. They weren't like questioning. It was like understanding and learning the game and accepting. And over time, there's great success of football in the province, and then it gets a little different, but that was refreshing. Getting people to understand what it took to have success, and what was going to have to happen in football in order to have success. That was a challenge. Even the work ethic, or what we need to have done, that's just not good enough. We have to be better than this. We have to take it to a different level if you want to be at a different level. And but they hadn't been around football, so there's a lot of what, as good as team we had on the field, we had an organization that had gave a lot of we had our veteran workers in the building that did different aspects of the business, but we also had a lot of young people that got chances and opportunities to grow, and over time they've done extraordinarily well. We've had the young francophone player that were great players. They got drafted, and they've gone on and they've taken that to another level, especially in the sports media and in the communities. But like getting that started and moving in that direction, what a challenge. People don't see that or understand it, or, they don't understand the hours upon hours that is spent even just trying to sell one ticket to come to a game. And then, and then even the decision to go outside and not play in Olympic Stadium, and to start refurbishing McGill, which our hands were forced to do it the first time because of the U2 concert, to have a home playoff game. And that stadium was decrepitated, and that game alone against BC was like that sold our team for the future. And then we decided the next decision was to stay outside, and then we started going back in to have some of the playoff games. So we know Montreal's a great, big event. People are going to come out for that one huge event all the time. And then we were fortunate to play well in most of those games. So, we were able to, sell our product at a level that, that kept selling tickets for a long time. And it didn't get us out of not having better facilities. We were our own worst enemy, because I'm sure from an ownership perspective, it's like, why do we need to go spend money to do what else when we're winning? And so, really to this day, they're still in Olympic Stadium. So, Toronto's the same way. I mean, they started working out of the, while I was there, we convinced them to let us work out of the soccer stadium. But those two teams still don't have a normal football facility.
Now, you've mentioned obviously the infamous U2 game. I spoke with former President Mark Waitman a couple years ago on the 25th anniversary, and he told us quite some stories. What do you remember specifically about the U2 game? Obviously, I understand you're on the player side, you're the general manager, and you're there no matter the locale you're in, wherever you're playing, you want to win the game. But is there anything that really sticks out to you specifically about the U2 game?
Well, first I'll say this. When we were told by the league office, either you find a local spot to play your game or the game goes to the visiting team. You're going to play in their city. And we're like, we can't let that happen. Come on. And so when we were able to play the game, down in the tree growing out of the stands, and they got things fenced off. And I'll never forget, and I never forget the people talking about it. But we had this phenomenal first half. We jumped on them 31 wood. Everything.
You were up. Yeah, you were up.
But I just remember how people were watching in the bars, and then they started walking up the road, and they were all trying to get into the stadium because they wanted to be a part of it. They wanted to be in the stadium, and they couldn't get in. There was nowhere to go. And I just know football in Montreal changed, even though it had very good teams up to that point, record-wise, and and talented players. The want to be at games changed because of that game. That's my view. Because of how we performed and how we played, and we're outdoors. And then once it was announced, we were gonna. Mr. Wettenhall was willing to work something out to spend some money and start changing. And then we're going to play games outdoors. It was exciting. It was exciting seeing the stadium being adjusted, being changed, being fixed. And then we realized, well, we got a special spot here. This is a special place. It's different. It's not home. People don't realize, every Alouette game's an away game for the players, and it's not traveling across the country to go to a game, but you got to pack up everything you got, the equipment room. I'm sure Mark Waitman's talked about this. Everybody in stadium operations, you got to pack up everything. You got to set it all up. You got to pack it back up. You got to take it back out of the stadium. It's not your stadium. And load of work that other people have home stadiums and fields that don't have to go through. It's quite the production to put on a game every time you play there, with all the work that's got to be done to taking it in and out of a place that you're basically renting for a day, and not able to keep majority of what you have there. So you're in and out of a locker room, and they're not normal size pro locker rooms. They weren't, or hadn't been. They got upgraded and as best you could over periods of time. I don't know how they are today, but it was such a unique place, and as you win, you embrace it, and then everybody embraced it. Instead of fighting it, they embraced it, and became home, and then it became, this is how things are supposed to. This is how you have success. This is how things are supposed to be done, and this is the model to follow in the CFL.
As you mentioned, the first two years that the Owls were at the Big O. They were the worst in the league when it came to attendance. I've always said this for years, Jim, since the U2 game itself. And I don't know, maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't. I've always said that if it wasn't for U2 and moving to Percival Molson for that game, I've always said that I don't think the Alouettes would be around today, just because of, as you said, what it became because of that one simple game.
I agree, because listen. When you're in a 60th, and this is anywhere in North America to this day, but in the CFL or wherever, if you're playing in a venue too big, where people don't have to buy season tickets to get a ticket, we created demand for our product. We told people we were going to win once we decided to play outdoors. Mr. Wettenhall would never let all 20,000 tickets be season tickets. He would only allow 17,000 to be season tickets, and every game had 3,000 open to the public. But it became, even then, that people thought they were all gone. But it made people buy the tickets. If you want to go to the game, you better buy the ticket. You better buy the season ticket, or you're not going to the game. And so it created a demand. Now you have to win to create that, and we won all the time. We went through I think 7 straight years in Montreal with 12 wins or more to open up when we first got there. And then you go back to Baltimore, I think 9 straight years we went, or 6 and 8, whatever it was. But that's just not even matched, it hasn't been matched in order to have, that's before we even went to Grey Cups every year, and so, every other year. But, we went through a stage there where, I think in an 11-year period, we were in 8 Grey Cups. And but after even that first section, even when we weren't going to Grey Cups, we had built that up. We had built that product. We had great players. We had Hall of Famers, future Hall of Famers. And then the Grey Cup run went. And in there, we were able, even when we had a down year, we were able to still win and get in, and find a way to do it. And at some point, guys age out. I can specifically pinpoint after we went to the Grey Cup in, what was it, 2000? 2001, I think Coach Russ was the coach. We started out pretty good, and it just kind of tanked. But after the 2000 season, we knew we had to change. We had to change. We had to change a lot of things. But we made a decision as an ownership, as a president. We sat down and we're like, look, people are going to expect some of these players back. We got to roll with them, another season. Well, somewhere in there, it started catching up. And then you had to go through a series of changes. But that season, it caught up to us as the season went along, and with injury, we just couldn't sustain. And then, the next year, I think I was able to convince Mr. Wettenhall to take a look at Coach Matthews, and then we hired Coach. And then the following year, we get right back to a Grey Cup. We brought a bunch of new players in, and then, we went on a pretty strong run the next 5 years, 6 years. I think 5 out of 6 Grey Cups, or I may be off there, but close to it. 3 out of 4, before. But, we were on a strong run. And then, next thing we go. I was always the bridge or Mr. Wettenhall. People always looked at me and like, why are you being the head coach? And I never asked to be the head coach. It's just that the bond that we created, and the first time he ever asked me to do it was, which when you look on it, was very strange. The last game of the season, he gets rid of the head coach. But I think he just didn't think there was any chance we had to win under how it's going. We made the playoffs that, I need a change. And so I was just a quick bridge, but every time we ever did, he trusted, he knew, I knew everything going on. He knew I wasn't in there to call plays for the offense and defense. I was there. I know the league like the back of my hand. I know the clock. I know the rules. I'd been a coach, and I was asked to do that. So each time he ever was willing or ready to make a change, because, when he wanted to change, he wanted to change. There was no change in that. It was his team. I want to change. And then the first thing he would do, I said, what do you want to do? And he goes, I want you to coach. And I said, well, he goes, I want you to talk to your wife, and I want you to do it. And then let's get through the season. I said, well, as long as we're interviewing and hiring someone the next year, I said, I'll be happy to. And I think the only time that was really a long dilemma was after, I think I brought Troy Smith in, and Deron Carter was a rookie, and we had made quite a run, and those guys were really gelling and doing well. And it was like, do we keep this going for another season? And we ended up not doing that. And then eventually, we hired somebody, and then that went a whole nother direction. But up, and then we had Don for several years, and then, we were able to hire Coach Tressman, who I brought to the table. But that was probably one of my, doing personnel was one of my great feats, but one of my other very strong points is knowing who to hire. and who to bring in and to bring in at the time, even before Trestman, I brought Milanovic in, and I was the only coach that Trestman kept. And it was really about the only coach I ever hired. I never hired a coach. I never hired my own coaching staff. I always had to take over for whatever coach was there. And that's not an easy thing to do because they're all loyal to the coach that was there. It's very difficult. So people don't even understand all the different things. When some of my best general manager stuff is when I was having to be the coach, keeping the team together and being able, but 4 out of those 5 years we went to the playoffs. One of them was a great guy. So that's why Mr. Wetnall would always come back to me because he trusted it. He always felt like if I need to change and do something, I'm gonna go to Jim, and that's kind of how things went for a long time. And it may seem strange, or people looked at me and go, "Why are you putting yourself as the head coach?" I'm not, and I'm not going to turn around and tell an owner who's been loyal and done everything like I'm not doing that. That just wasn't ever going to come out of my mouth, to somebody who's paying your paycheck, like, what do you want? And what do you want said, what do you want addressed to the team? And you don't go and go, the owner wants this. You go up there and say, this is what we're doing. A lot of times it's the owner wants this, but that's not how you address the team. Yeah.
So if I were to guess, just from what you're just saying now, Jim, you were okay with being a head coach and GM, but it sounds like you would rather have just been the GM. Is that right? Because obviously here in Montreal, Danny Machocha did the same thing when he was hired, when the new ownership came in here with Pierre Carpelado. Am I guessing right? You would rather have just been the GM rather than a head coach GM?
Well, listen, I was a GM. You can have different titles for people, but people who are GMs, there are GMs that never leave the office. There are GMs that never scout. There are GMs, you can put a GM title. I was a GM that hit the road and scouted. I'm sitting there looking at the players firsthand. I'm the one bringing them in. I'm on the road during the season, not with the team, doing stuff. I'm coming back, Sometimes I'm with the team, sometimes I'm not. Okay, I used to be at a point where I felt like I need to be at every game. I don't care where I was. I'd get on a flight and go to the game, and it just got to a point, this is crazy. Especially when I had veteran coaches like Coach Matthews or someone who knew the league. When we had coaches that never coached in the league, a little different because they're asking you and depending on you. Or even when I brought Trestman in, they don't know the rules. They don't know everything. They're asking you questions all the time. So, yeah, let me say this. Our model in Montreal, and to me was for the most and best success, was having and we would have monthly meetings, or at least every 2 months. We would have these meetings regularly. And then as time went, it slowed and changed and even stopped happening, was to have the owner, president, GM, and head coach meet. And for everybody to be able to do their jobs properly and to do it at best, you needed someone in all single person, those 4 positions. You don't need people doing dual roles. I don't care to this day in the CFL. It's a power play. I don't care I'm not going to bring up names. The ones that carried those titles, they weren't doing the work. They had very good people that they called their personnel people doing their work for them, but they carried the title. They weren't doing the work. Okay, so I'm not going to pretend like I was the head coach. I was a head coach that wasn't coaching a position or calling plays. I wasn't a coordinator. I wasn't doing that. I was making game day decisions. Okay. And for the organization and doing this to get through a season and let's give us our best chance, And but for me to be at my best was to just be the GM. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I believe to this day, nobody should have both titles. There should be a separate person doing that. The model that the CFL has built, and again, they put a cap on everything, and then part of putting a cap on it is for coaches or head coaches or their staffs or people to get paid more than they're giving both titles to a guy. Okay, and they're not doing all that. There's somebody else that is part of that of sharing that credit. Look, you can bring all the talent you want to a coach, and then you as a group, you got to make a decision. And yes, most coaches are deciding who they're playing. It's not the GM. Like I had last say in Montreal all the time. I never told a coach who they had to play. If an owner told us who we had to play, which once that starts happening, you got a problem. Okay, and that's happened to me a couple times, which is not good when it gets to that. Okay. But like when they start wanting to see something else or someone, but sometimes you're not winning at the time. And, but you know, you're talking, you're discussing, you're listening, you're in meetings, you're formulating your roster every week. And then who do you want? You know, and it's not just the head coach, it's the position coaches. Who do you want? Bum, 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 bum. And then you're making your decisions. And then, okay, this is what we're rolling with. Doesn't mean you agree every week, you know, and sometimes I'd have the head coach come to me and go, our O-line coach thinks he has an offensive lineman might be better than someone we have. And I might have seen the guy 4 times in 2 years in NFL camps. And like, he's not as good as what we got. Well, he had him, 4 years ago? Maybe he was 4 years ago. Today, he's not. But I would appease the coach and go, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll bring him in, put him on a practice roster, but let's agree in 2 weeks, if he's not there, then let's send him home. But I'll do it. Or he wants to start this guy over this guy. Okay, all right, but I'm not sending this guy home. Classic example, S.J. Green. S.J. Green was going home, I don't know how many times. And I said, he's not going home. And so I was one of them that worked out, you know, becomes a Hall of Famer. But like that, I stood on the table and like, well, he's not going home. You know, and it took a while for him to ever break in as a starter. Not that he wasn't good enough. It was just that we had the same starting guys for like 4 years in a row. And he was more talented than some of them, but there was great chemistry with those 4 or 5 guys. So it wasn't going to change. Lucky he stayed with us. He could have left, you know, and, but, you know, I stood by him, I stuck by him, and, you know, and then he proved his worth, you know, and there's a lot of stories like that. I'm just using him as an example, but, you know, starting with an owner down, you know, there's got to be a great relationship, working relationship. You don't have to be buddy and go eat dinner and, you know, and do everything together, but like, it's got to be a great working relationship when you're formulating your team between a GM and a head coach, understanding and respect one another. So really, that's what I say. You got to respect one another. And if there's no respect there, or it becomes hostile or it's not respect, you know, there's time to change. There's time to move on, you know, and Bob Wettenhall was very in tune to a lot of that because he, you know, he was close to people, you know, he was close to players. He was close. And sometimes you can go, it's too close, you know, like he'd listen and hear some of that and they'd have their own opinion. It didn't mean exactly what it was, but he owned the team. He had every right. That's exactly, you know, he has every right to make his own choice with his team. And then if you work for him, you make your choice whether you want to stay and be a part of that with any owner. That's what takes place.
Let's talk about some of those relationships that you've built in your time as general manager. Arguably, perhaps the greatest relationship you built was with one Anthony Calvillo. Mm-hmm. One thing, it's funny, I always have to eat crow about this because when you had announced that you were, I think you brought him in on free agency, if I recall. I, at the time, didn't think too highly of him, and I thought this isn't going to work. I just don't see how it's going to, especially when you have Tracy Ham as your quarterback. I mean, what do you need this guy for? Like, he's done nothing as far as I'm concerned, but you saw something in him. You saw the potential of him becoming an all-time great, and sure enough, he did. What was it about AC that you saw? I'm guessing, I don't know if you saw when you were in Baltimore, if you saw him playing for Las Vegas, or was strictly when he was with Hamilton. What was it that you saw about AC that said, yeah, that's the guy I'm going to build my franchise around?
Well, it was both. Okay, so it was Baltimore and it was Hamilton. You got to remember, he came straight out of college. You know, whether people know this or not, when Las Vegas was awarded a team, they set up a practice. They set up a practice field in the middle of a parking lot in downtown Las Vegas. He was one of 12 quarterbacks invited to Las Vegas. Ron Meyer was the coach. He won the job as a rookie right out of college. They had a very unique offense, an explosive offense. They did unique things. They put all the running backs in 80 numbers. They did some crazy stuff, but like they were difficult to stop offensively. He was at the helm, and defensively they weren't great. Okay. But they also were trying non-traditional CFL things. But he lit us up a couple times in Baltimore. Like, I'm talking 400 and 500 yards throwing the ball. And it was like, whoa, like, this is crazy. Who is this guy? And then he goes to Hamilton when the teams retract, and and he was supposed to have been the savior, and they were terrible. They weren't a very good team. And when I say that, they didn't have people to protect him, and he was constantly running for his life, getting hurt, but still had big games, even against us in Montreal. And the whole time, like, if that guy had the O-line we have and the receivers that, and at the time, O-line and running back, I mean, the pressure would be off this guy. Like, what is he capable of? So most people don't know, Tracy Ham came to me and Mr. Wettenhall and said, look, I'm retiring in 1 year. I just want to give you guys heads up in case you want to start making plans to get somebody else to be your quarterback. He didn't have to do that. So I was on the look for a year, knowing Tracy was going to retire. So I had a whole trade done with Hamilton because they didn't want to pay him his bonus. And I was sending 2-3 players to them for him. And they waited till the 11th hour, click at 12 o'clock when he was owed it, didn't pull the trigger, let him go. And then there was already an agreement in place, and Anthony already agreed to come to us. And then they didn't do it. And so I still gave him the players, Hamilton. And then Tracy came to us as though the trade was done. I mean, that's officially how it was done. And 2 other teams jumped in the mix trying to get him in the 11th hour, Toronto being one of them, I think Saskatchewan the other. And he gave us his word. He said, I gave you my word, I'm coming. So he comes, he sits with Tracy. Tracy's playing his one season. And then before the season ended, Tracy was always slick. People don't, I always laugh at Tracy because he'll deny it. But like Tracy, whether we were winning big or whether we were losing, and the game was out of hand, Tracy would find a way to get out of the game and go, hey, man, put Anthony in. But he purposely did it so Anthony would get to play. And it would be funny to see if he'd admit that. But I know what he was doing. And so AC would play. So AC got to play a good bit while Tracy. But like the crazy thing is Tracy didn't retire. And then Anthony went another year because we had a 2-year deal. And then I think Tracy played 3 seasons. And then, and Anthony had to resign another contract to stay. And so he became going from a starter to a backup basically for 3 years, waiting his turn. But Tracy was the master of keeping Anthony, interested in you're going to take over and this is going to be your team. And so, but he did play quite a bit for quarters, sometimes games before he became our starter. And he knew our system and our way and how we were going to do things. And so it was an easy, adjustment. Now, I can tell you going into that first year, Charlie Taft was head coach. And, Charlie Taft and I, I brought Charlie to the CFL. Charlie and I coached under Charlie at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina for 3 years. Mm-hmm. So Charlie was out of a job. I brought him up. He was the coordinator. Then he ended up being the head coach. So, Charlie had Anthony first, and we go to our first Grey Cup in Montreal. And, that was a very nerve-wracking first year because, Tracy was always called him, Papa Bear in the locker room. He had control of all the players. And here he's not there anymore. And it was AC's team. But, AC took that on, got us the Grey Cup. We almost won that Grey Cup. It was a great comeback. And, history writes itself, but that was the start of his legend. Now we probably went to 3 Grey Cups before people ever, Cliff, you're talking about that. I think it probably took 3 or 4 Grey Cups before people even gave, Anthony his credit of being one of the all-time greats. People, I don't think anybody would, and there are probably some people never even would agree to crown that until we went back to back. And, you know, AC was a tremendous player in the locker room. He was one of the boys. He was a very good athlete. You know, he would go out and play basketball with the guys, he'd play golf with the guys. You know, he was very loyal to his friends, and he didn't have to be a vocal leader. You know, people trust him, and you know that's why he's so loved, because he played that role and he played it phenomenal. You know, he was always, you know, there for those guys, and they trusted him, and you know, and he had some huge games. You know, people would say, well, he didn't have a good game in the in that game or championship. I said, you know how many great games he had in big games? I mean, you know, there's a lot of great big games. He had great games. You know, not everybody's going to always play their greatest game. And, you know, there's other people that shine sometimes, you know, in games, or, you know, and something happens or goes. But there's not a lot of people that ever did what he did. But, like, he was talented. He had a tremendously talented arm. He was very pinpoint, accurate passer, kind of Brady-ish. You know, just could, you know, short range, boom, hit that thing. Hurt his shoulder several times. Wasn't always the greatest deep ball thrower, but could get it there. But, you know, he could throw it pretty much on a line, 35, 40 yards. And he had tremendous receivers. You know, we surrounded him, and he had the greatest running back. You know, he had great weapons around him. But, like, and then the number one thing that I always did, even though you had great skill guys, is that I took care of the offensive line. They were the highest paid group of players at a position on our team the whole time I was ever a GM, is the O-line. And you take all 5 or 6 or 7 of them, they, as a group, they were the highest paid guys. And I made sure that they were the highest paid guys to help protect the number one player on your team, which is the quarterback. And that was just my philosophy. And that's how I did it. And most of them have all become Hall of Famers. I think the only one really hadn't been Neil Fort, which he should be. Maybe one day he will be. And there's been several after, you know, that we drafted that have become, that will be Hall of Famers also. But that was the whole key constantly, is to make sure you had that group of guys taken care of, so they took care of it. So you had that tremendous bond. You know, they looked after him, and if he got knocked down, they were going to pick him up, and they were going to fight somebody if he did get hit.
Not to mention, a lot of those offensive linemen were national players, Canadian-born players.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
Being able to draft that many players and having the wherewithal to, as you said, protect your quarterback, protect your most valuable asset with the national talent is something that I think a lot of people don't truly appreciate until you start talking about just how important the national position is in the Canadian Football League.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I set out, you know, and I always studied great teams. I don't care if they were NFL teams or the great CFL teams when I came in, you know, the ones that are always winning, and I'm looking at them, and, you know, and even if they weren't winning, you know, when Winnipeg had their 2 bookend guys, and I'm looking and I'm like, okay, you know, you always were trying to, you know, there was a period of time there weren't as good as so-called skill guys at the Canadian universities. There always were some. And today there's a lot of them. You know, the football, you know, you know, what people don't realize is, you know, once indoor facilities were built and there's training facilities and there's more, you know, football going on than the athlete is, you know, the lateral movement, all this kind of stuff became great, you know, and the Canadian athletes, as good as the American athlete, is just, you know, there was the opportunity or the training that they had. So over time that became equaled out a lot. So, but at the time, you always were trying to get your skill guys to be the so-called Americans, and you still always had Canadians at slot receiver or, you know, at a position like that. We're still playing skill positions. And then if you came across a guy like a Davis Sanchez who could play corner and lock down anybody, didn't matter, he's Canadian, you know, then he got paid a lot of money. You know, he got paid more than most players did because he was the only one. You know, when you're in the unicorn. When you're a unicorn out there, you get paid. And so when you find people, but like, you know, when we came to Montreal and we didn't have a team, and some of our best we had tremendous offensive linemen. A lot of them had gone to the NFL, but some of them came back. And then all of a sudden, and then we had, when we had dispersal draft of the expansion teams, and every team in the league got rich. The CFL was probably at its greatest talent after the U.S. teams retracted, and there was 8 teams and went from 13 down to 8, and all these players went back on teams, so everybody got deep. And so I picked up Uzumo Okeke, and he comes to Montreal and he can't make the team. And Ottawa's like during the season, he's on our practice roster, and Ottawa's folding, and we were told by the league office that everybody had to give Ottawa 2 players. In Montreal, you need to give them offensive linemen. I'm like, what do you mean we have to give? Like they're dictating us what we had to give them. But we had good linemen, and so, but we were playing 4 American offensive linemen, which is unheard of. But because we didn't have Canadian offensive linemen, we had just gone through our first draft, and so we had to give Uzo away. So as soon as Ottawa folded, and then we had an expansion, a dispersal draft of Ottawa, I drafted him right back. It's the first pick I took was to get him back, and of course he became our left tackle. Neil was our right, and then we had 3 Canadians inside, eventually, and then little by little I started drafting Canadian offensive tackles that whether they played at Canadian University or U.S. school that could be starting tackles in the then once Uzo and Neil were done, then it went strictly Canadian, and we stayed Canadian. We were Canadian across the board. And sometimes we'd have an American be the 6th guy on the roster, not even starting, just as a guy that could play. I think Skip Seagraves at one time could play all 3 positions, but he wasn't starting, but he backed up everybody. And that's how we used one of our Americans because he could back up all 3 positions, center, guard, and tackle. And he was starting tackle at the University of North Carolina, but he wasn't starting for us because our guys were the best, the best guys. But once I was able to get the whole team turned to where we were all Canadian, then that was the goal, to keep it that way and never change it. And the bond, I go back, like I'll go back to the BC Baltimore game. They had a tremendous offensive line, all Canadian, and that was a difference in their team. They played phenomenal together. And I never forgot that. And I'm like, we got to have that. We got to have that bond amongst our guys. And we had it with all those American guys that were playing in Baltimore, but it was just short term because next thing you know, several of them were in the NFL. But Sharp Ardonish and Mark Dixon, and, we lost them. But we had some very good players that ended up losing their jobs because they were beat out by, or ratio beat them out, or, with the Canadian ratio. Or the Canadian player was just as good. All of a sudden I went from an all-star center at Nick Subas, and then I draft Brian Chew. And, Brian Chew, I'm glad to see Brian got in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Looks phenomenal. I haven't talked to Brian in a while. I tried calling him. I don't know if I even have the right number. I tried to congratulate him and Copeland. And, but, Brian, my gosh, from the day we ever got him, had bad knees, unbelievable how tough the guy was. He did miss a game. And that's, when you have offensive linemen who don't miss a game, beat up, hurt, play hurt, I mean, they love one another. They take care. They don't want to miss anything. And that's part of their history of why they should be in the Hall of Fame, not just the great teams, but I mean, how are you not? I mean, how's Neil Fort not when you have the all-time leading rusher ever? You got all-time one of the great teams. I mean, he's one of the great tackles, and he's I don't know where that all stands and how it even gets chosen for a Hall of Fame, but he should be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah,
I agree. You're absolutely right. It's crazy to think about all the great offensive linemen, and I'm glad you brought up Brian because we had him on the show earlier this year to give him his flowers for the tremendous work he did in Montreal, and he was so effusive in praising you as far as taking a chance on this kid from Vancouver and bring him to Montreal. And it was a bit of a culture shock for him. But once he, as you talked about, developed that relationship with his fellow O-lineman, his fellow Canadian O-lineman, like the rest was history. It was, like I said, he's got nothing but love for you. So if you want, I don't have his number, but I can definitely give you his email
Yeah,
address.
I need to, because the numbers that I was given, I reached out to both him and Copeland, and I never heard from either ones. And I'm like, well, maybe these aren't the right numbers. But someone told me they were, but I never heard from either one. I don't think they ever got the message, because I know both would call. But it's that, even like, Copeland, I mean, like, I was going back and forth with Copeland when I brought him in, and I was letting him go back and forth to NFL Europe, and then he'd come play for us, and he'd go back. I'd let him keep doing it because he was still getting shots in the NFL with Dallas. But we were so loaded, and Terrence Edwards was that way, and Andrew Hawkins. We had, the different players, even all the returners we had. We were just so loaded at depth that not all of them could get on the field, and you'd never want to lose those people, or the coaches are helping choose who they want to keep versus somebody else. But when they go on and they have success somewhere, that's like me plucking in I'll get it in a second, but it's like plucking somebody else to your team that's been on a practice roster, not getting an opportunity, and they excel with you. So, you're the one that gave them that opportunity to get there, and then you keep them. But like when you see them go on somewhere else because they're just not getting as much opportunity, and they need to get on the field. As a person that does personnel work, you did your job. You either did your job finding someone to bring them in, or you did your job because they couldn't make your team, and your team's that good that you're helping supply players for the other 7 teams in the league. That's really what happened, and we had a lot of that go on during that era. And but you feel great for them because you're picking the right people, and you also know that you're sitting there and feel good for those people that they've had a great career because they deserved it. They were that good.
It's actually a pretty good segue, because what we wanted to ask, since we're talking about players and stuff like that, because I do want to actually ask you about Mark Trestman, but I want to ask you this first. But is there a player that you regret letting get away?
Well, give me some examples, and I'll tell you if we let them get away or if they made their choice to get away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, because you talk about these media stories. Like, let's be real
fair.
here.
That's fair. Okay, I'll give you one. I think he was under your tenure. Chad Owens.
Yeah, well, Chad Owens made an agreement with us going to training camp the year before. Now, Chad, I had Chad on the neg list probably for 8 years. Chad got hurt in the Arena League. After the NFL, he wouldn't come to the CFL. He was coming off a knee injury. He came and played for us. He wasn't up to 100% speed the year before. We let him do some returns near the end of the season. He comes back to camp. He's under contract. He wanted to come under contract equal to the guys that, his contract was slated as a returner and not as a starting receiver. He wanted a starting receiver contract. And we made an agreement that if you don't make it as a starting receiver, then you got to revert back to your other contract. So we go through camp, and once camp was over, he didn't want to change his contract. Okay. And so it came down. So because Andrew Hawkins played and he had this phenomenal season, but Andrew also got hurt. He broke his ankle going in the Grey Cup. Yeah. And what career he had in the NFL. So coming back, and we have both these guys, and then Andrew's still actually hurt, and the doctors projected he'd be ready by the 2nd game, which he never was ready until about the 9th game. So then we're sitting here with the coaching staff, and Coach Trestman's like, which I understand why he would rather have Andrew, because Andrew had been playing for him, quite a bit. And so we could have kept both as long as Chad went back to his original contract, but he didn't want to. And again, I don't fault Chad. Chad, I don't even know how Chad did it. Chad married, had several kids, living in a hotel room. And that's the side that people don't see, not making a lot of money. You know, he had a connection in Toronto, you know, going back to Hawaii, that they said, come play for us. And he had in his mind, that's what he wanted to do. So we traded him and got something for him to Toronto. And I have all the love for Chad, but our agreement was for you to be able to stay, that you had to be, you know, for our cap to work, this is what you had to do if you weren't a starting receiver. He felt he should be a starting receiver. And he went and proved himself over in Toronto. But like, again, we probably went 4 or 5 years without changing a starting receiver and on our team, you know, and we had great receivers, you know. And so Chad came to the CFL and did what he was capable of doing, what he was phenomenal at in college. You know, was trying to break in the NFL, was still trying to break in the NFL, went to Renly when he got hurt. And I look at it as it was one of the great things that happened for our league, for this talent, for the city of Toronto to have a hero when they were really struggling. And all of a sudden they had a player that they all went to and then became a CFL star. And Terrence Edwards is a similar kind of story. Okay. Similar, very similar, where he was on and off our roster and in and out, you know, and he ended up going to Winnipeg, and then he became their star receiver. And if he'd have stayed in Montreal, he wasn't going to be the star receiver. Copeland wasn't going to be, you know, he was right there, but like you had guys like Ben Cahoon and these, you know, and different people that were already starring. I mean, like some want their own stardom, you know, or not as much sharing. Not that they're not teammates, you know, but I don't fault, you know, when you look at it, but there's reasons why it wasn't just trade to get rid of. We didn't think you were good enough. That had nothing to do with it. Not one thing. And so, you know, that's the real story on that one. And but it paid off for him, and I don't fault him at all. You know, now he probably held that, and you know, and that was part of his ammo to compete hard against us. And you guys, you know, like I think a lot of times players get traded or sent somewhere, or he knew exactly what the whole story was there, but they used that ammo publicly in the media, you know, to get their game up and then perform and get everybody riled up, and then the media plays off of it. And the media, most of the time, don't even know what the real story is.
That's the thing. Yeah. Cliff, was there somebody? Because Chad just came to mind. Is there somebody that if you could ask Jim about?
I'm just trying to think here. Anybody that
mentioning Terrence, of course. I mean, that's the biggest one, because it sounded to me at the time, and maybe you can like expand upon this. It was just a simple matter of, it was a clerical thing more than anything else. Why? Because again, you had Robert Edwards, his brother, playing.
But see, Robert again. Both these men are great guys. High school football coach, done a great job. Robert at the time, from what I remember, we brought Jarrett Payton in because Robert would get worn down, and we wanted another back like Robert. So Jarrett was in there to be the backup to come in for Robert. When we brought Jarrett in, I think we had a press conference or something. It really upset them because he took it as, or someone made him feel like we were getting rid of him for Jarrett, because the media made such a big deal about Jarrett, and the club probably did too, you know, looking back on it, because it was Walter Payton's son.
Yeah.
But the real reason we brought Jarrett in is because, you know, Robert would get worn down and, you know, be really tired by the end of the game, or like not at his best for the next game or two. And then, you know, then he would be perked back up. And we just felt like we needed two backs like that, you know, like to offset the other if we needed it, you know. And if one couldn't go, then, you know, we didn't miss it. But we had the same type of back, a big power back that was in the backfield. And I think that kind of played a role with both of them, and Terrence, where, you know, it kind of offset, you know, being, you know, not as happy with the Alouettes, or you guys don't want us. And that had nothing to ever do with it, to be honest. It had nothing to do with it. But, you know, there's things you can't control. You can talk to them, you can tell them whether they believe you or not. But as people and as players, both those men, all three of them with Chad, they're great guys. They're great people. They're great competitors. They're tremendous football players. That's why they had the success they did. Look, I'm sitting here thinking of I ever made a bad trade. I'm sure I have. I think I won a lot more than I lost. But I don't really, I know as an organization, I'll say this, as an organization, we told Mike Pringle if he ever wanted to be let out of his contract, we would do it for him. And he came to us asking out of his contract. He just tore his knee up the year before. There was always a little bit of heat between him and Coach Matthews. There always was, going back to Baltimore. We had other backs in. They were playing. He was playing a role, and then he got hurt. He got submarine, tore his knee up. And then when the season ended, he asked to be let go. And, I think Coach Machocho was, played a part in that because he had coached him in Montreal and they had a relationship, and he told him he could come to Edmonton. So then he wanted to go to Edmonton, and we let him leave. And I know Mr. Wettenhall always said that's the one thing I regretted is letting Mike leave. And for somebody that's your all-time leading rusher and a guy that's been with your team, and looking back on it, yeah, but we were true to our word. We told him, if you don't want to be here or want to play the role that is there. And the whole thing is he'd already become back the starter, when he got hurt, but he asked to be let go. So I kept my word, and Mr. Wetnell kept his word that if you don't want to be here, we'll let you go. And so he was let go. Now he used that ammo and, and motivation against us or playing against us, and still probably does to this day. But that's the honest truth, is that he asked to be let go out of his deal because he didn't think that he should have still been really the marquee back, which I don't think, you can argue with any of that stuff. But at the time, it was just what it was between him and a coach and how things were. And we were a successful team. We won the Grey Cup that year. He went and won a Grey Cup. So, it's, that there was no wrong. But the wrong is that I think ideally you would want that guy to stay with you and retire, like Anthony did, and retire as an Alouette from the get-go. So like that you wish didn't happen, 100%.
Yeah. In 07, you finished your first, and like I said, your first and only full season as Alouettes head coach.
Mm-hmm.
And then, how did the process start for Mark Trestman? The whole process with him coming into Montreal.
Yeah, well, that was we had just gone to the Grey Cup, so I had stepped in and then won some very key games. Got to the Grey Cup, we lost the Grey Cup, and then Mr. Wettenhall wanted me to stay on, and we had long talks, and I'm like, look, Bob, I'll do it one more season, but we have to hire a coach at the end of the season, and he agreed. So I was just going to do it for that season. We were going to go through a transition year, so it really, in some ways, wasn't fair to bring somebody in because we were going to make some wholesale changes, which, we made some really, with Parker and Brown, bringing them DBs in, we had to make some changes. The team had aged and gotten to a point where we really need to get some different players in. These were two players that I was trying to get into the CFL for a couple years. And finally got him to come. That's when I hired Milanovic. I really felt like Anthony needed a true quarterback coach. He never really had a true quarterback coach this whole time. And I just felt like at this stage of his career, he needed a coach like that. And I thought Scott was going to be the perfect guy. I'd gotten to know Scott while he was a coach in NFL Europe. And when I'd go out scouting in the off season, I'd see Scott because he'd scout for NFL Europe. And then he was living, I think, in Syracuse or, an area like that, Rochester or somewhere. So he wasn't far from Montreal. I'm like, hey, but he was in line to potentially be a head coach in the NFL Europe. And it was a hard decision for him, but he came. but the key is to have somebody for Anthony. I just felt like that was going to be the best thing for him the rest of his career, is to have a true quarterback coach. So we get into that training camp, and I had a relationship, not a real close relationship, but it started when I was a young man. I was a coaching at the Citadel, and my dad was a defensive coach, assistant head coach for the Cleveland Browns, and Mark Trestman was the quarterback coach with Bernie Kosar, at the Cleveland Browns. So when I had time, I'd go up to the Browns, and they're so busy, you're in the way. I'm like, I'm there, and I'm like, where do I go? And Mark would be like, you can come sit in my room. So I'd go in there and sit. He didn't have a lot of conversations, but he allowed me to sit, and then we'd talk a little bit, and then go out to practice. And so that's where my relationship started with him. And over time, we kind of lost that. And then he ended up in NC State as the offensive coordinator. And I had reached out to him the year before because I had a high school kid in my hometown that wanted to go to NC State. And I picked up the phone and called Mark and said, look, I said, Mark, going back a long time here, but I have a kid that his dream is to play for NC State. And I said, can you at least call him, give him a thrill? Well, he didn't ever call him. He flipped it to the strength coach, Coach Meyer, who ended up being a NFL coach too. And that's kind of how I got those relationships started back. So when we started that season, I asked Mark, because the whole staff at NC State got fired. Mark's now helping the Saints doing some work. And I said, can you come up and be a guest coach? And he had no idea what that meant. I said, just come on up for 3 or 4 days. So he comes up for 3 or 4 days. Okay. And I let him speak to the team. He couldn't believe I was going to let him speak to the team. I said, I want you to speak to the team. And after he had been there for a few days, and I let him sit in meetings and talk to the players and work with the quarterbacks, I looked at him. I said, because he was going home, I said, what do you think of this? I said, you think you'd ever want to be a head coach? Because he had never been a head coach. I said, think about it. And he said, what are you saying? I said, let's get through the season. I said, just think about it. I said, this might be an opportunity here. And so we go through the season, and we get to the end of the season, and we're going to pick a coach. And I know at that time, it was very Larry Smith was very adamant, and he went very public, really past Mr. Wettenhall, that we're going to have an experienced coach. We're going to have all these different things. And that's not what Mr. Wettenhall wanted. He wanted something different. So I brought Mark to the table, and he was one of 8 people that interviewed. And he walked in the room, and he goes, I just want to let you know, I don't know if I'm really interested in this job. He says, I'm here to listen, but I'm here because of Jim Popp, and I just want to make sure I give it all, it's due. And he was so organized. So he does the interview, and after the interview, he was the 8th guy that interviewed. Mr. Wettenhall goes, that's who I want to hire. He goes, that's him. And then Mark got offered the job, and then Mark goes, well, let me think about it. And then Mr. Wettenhall said to me and Larry, he goes, if he doesn't take the job, I want someone just like him. So I don't want those other 7 people we interviewed. He goes, I want someone like that. So then I had to go back and start finding all these other people. And I said, Bob, you got to understand something. I said, that's just unique. I said, you're not going to find a guy who's been a quarterback coach that's available from the NFL, and you're not going to find someone I know and have a relationship with. I said, we can try to find somebody, but it's just not an easy fit that we'll find everything that you're looking for. Well, long story short, he takes the job, right? And then, and it just, it worked. It might not have worked. It worked, and he was, Mark had I always say he had a golden platter in front of him. We had some great players. We just made a changeover of our team. Scott Milanovic even said, Mark has no idea what we went through last year, the changeover and all the work that was done to get the team to where it is. But like for him as an offensive coach, I mean, he had unbelievable group of guys, and he did a phenomenal job play calling for Anthony and getting the ball into those, and brought something different to the CFL. And then at the time, I mean, we got all the rules changed in the league because I had these big receivers coming out of the back, and they, at the time, you could push off and power through people like Ray Elgard used to do, and nobody else had that, and like they just felt it was unfair, so they changed the rule. You could never do that anymore. There's no more of that shoving and pushing off that was historically done in the CFL, and but he took full advantage of it, and for someone that had never been in the league, and he was constantly trying to learn the clock, and that was always something to struggle, or the wind. Taking the wind, it wasn't normal football for him. But and then the players respected him. They hadn't had a coach like that. And it was, that's always the interesting thing when you have a coach. You could have the success that Don Matthews had, and you could have the success Mark Trestman. They're totally different coaches. If you're always trying to find someone just like them after you've had somebody like that, it's just not gonna work a lot of times. You got to have somebody different that comes across or rings differently with people, or they try to relate it, or like that guy's trying to be, Coach Matthews trying to be Mark Trestman, and somebody may want someone to be like that, but like it's not going to work that way. So you got to find the right fit of person, and it's a guessing game sometimes when they've never been a head coach or been in the CFL when you take that opportunity, or they could have been a coordinator and everybody loved them, and then as soon as they become a head coach, not the same person. They don't relate to them the same way. So, those type of things is really how the Mark Trestman thing came about, and again that was a notch for me because it's somebody I brought to the table that I felt could have success. But again, when I go back and talk to you about finding the right fit for Anthony Calvillo, that was also my thought process with Mark Trestman. That's why I brought him to the table, because I thought Anthony, for him to finish his career and be at the top of his game and have the best he could be, let's give him offensive guys, coaches, because that is our bread and butter guy. That's our man. That's who we're putting our next 10 years on, or at least, a long time. And it paid off, it paid off. And even convincing, Trestman to hire, after Jamie Elizondo coached for us for a year and he left, and we had some different quarterbacks, but Marcus Brady was a backup, and he's, and I said, well, make Marcus the receivers coach. And he goes, what are you talking about? And I said, he knows the offense. He knows everything. He's been calling the plays. He knows everything. He's the bench guy. He's sitting on the bench waiting. I said, just, he'd be the greatest receiver coach you could have. Teach him. And he never thought it would work. He's like, I don't see it. I said, well, give him a chance, coach. And he did. And then look at Marcus today, but he came to me a year later. He goes, that's unbelievable. Because I just never saw that. But that's part of my strength. I kind of see things ahead of time and project stuff, and not always right. So I'm not going to pretend that, but like a lot of times. So, I mean, that, having the ability to hire or project things, is very helpful and sustaining and having, and when people don't all have that same vision, or people come in and just say, we're not going to do stuff this way. And you try to explain, well, this is how we're going to have success, or how we've had success. And they get to the point where like, well, I don't care. We're not going to do it that way anymore. It doesn't mean it can't work the way they want to do it. But when it's not working, there's a reason, that things get going south the wrong way, and a lot of people don't understand or think or even know the reason why, but there's a reason.
It's basically it's everybody's playing checkers and you're playing 3D chess.
So, yeah, I mean, it's, I've just kind of always been that kind of way as an athlete a little bit. I just always had, I don't know what I can't even, it's intuition of what to do or next. I was that way as a point guard. I'm flipping passes and throwing, and people aren't ready for the ball. And you're just like, you know, I guess you got to play with each other long enough to, okay, you know, I better be ready for this. He may flick one behind his back and hit me in the head or something. But, you know, it's some natural instinct that I was born with, that I have, that I see things. And, you know, I've been fortunate even the last 4 years working with Daryl Johnston, you know, and he's like, it's unbelievable the things you see that you foresee. But like part of it, to be honest, is just experience. I started young and I've had all this experience, and it's things you go through that give you that too. And people that might have been working and doing something for 2 or 3 years, they just don't have that. And they just don't naturally see it, you know, as easy it is when you've grown up in it. And that's why a lot of times a coach's son in sports has done so well, or they're leaders or natural leaders, or because they just grew up listening and hearing all this stuff all the time, and they're a little more prepared for it, you know, in circumstances. And again, doesn't mean you're always right. So I mean, I'm not always right, but I have this intuition when I meet people for the first time, you know, and not that I don't give people second chances, but I mean, I can tell in 10 minutes whether it's somebody I really want to be around or them to be a part of what we have. And, you know, and I've had to change my opinion on some people, but most of the time, and I've always felt like that was part of the reason we always had great locker rooms, because I felt it was a good mix with the guys we have, and they'll get along and they'll do well. And there's always somebody that you got to convince your team with. And I always, you know, David Sanchez is one of those guys, because he was very confident and you know, and about his ability and could play, and, you know, and he came in as a rookie, and I'll never forget Rod Russ standing up in the meeting one day. He cut the film off and he looked at everybody, turned the lights on, and he looked at everybody. He goes, "This young man right here is going to be here. Some of you aren't. So you better accept him and start playing with him. Turn the lights back off. Let's watch film." Because he knew
Love it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he knew it. And of course, that probably, you know, he probably bolted up even more, you know, but like, but, you know, Davis, you know, I can remember when Dave Naylor called me, and what do you think about David? You know, Davis would possibly doing media stuff. I said, it'd be fantastic.
Yes.
You know, but you know how
Yeah,
Deion
yeah.
Sanders was when he was doing stuff where he went back and coached. I said, Davis is going to be a Deion Sanders type guy. He's going to be real, and he's going to tell you like it is. And if it's going to be different than the other people have, but I said, if people let him, he's smart as can be, and you're going to see how good he'll do. And Naylor went to bat for him, and look at him. He's done well. But that's Davis.
Yep.
So I have all the confidence in Davis. And Davis is always, you know, come to me for advice. Every time, you know, you go back to NFL, come back, you know, Jim, you know, Calgary's offering me this. What should I do? Take it. We're not going to be able to pay you that. Take it. You know, a year later, they're trading him. I'll take him back. So I always laugh. I never had to pay him what everybody else paid him. I always got him back. And then Edmonton, I said, take it. You know, and then he wanted to go home because his mom was very sick at cancer. And she always thanked me every time she'd see me. Thank you for taking care of it. Hey, he knows what he's doing. He's a great player, and, you know, and he's very respectful. You know, he always was respectful with me, and he always had a relationship that he could pick up the phone and call me and ask me for advice, and he knew he was going to get the real answer. You know, even if we were going to lose him, like, Davis, if you want to get paid double the money, you got to take it, man. They're going to pay you that, take it. And that's the kind of relationship we had.
I know there's one question that Cliff wants to ask you specifically about the 13th man. Cliff, you have to ask the question because I know you love asking this question.
Well, before I do want to get from your point of view, that 2009 Grey Cup where, and this is a stat that will forever blow my mind. The Montreal Alouettes won that championship despite never leading until zeros on the clock in the fourth quarter. I want to know your going through that game from the highs and lows, everything of it. I want to just really quick, just give us your take on that game overall.
Oh, I'll say this first of all. I always say this. It's a shame And maybe the flags going up as soon as the kick was being made distracted Damon Duvall a little bit, and he missed the kick. But I'll make that excuse for him. But like if he'd have hit the kick, whether there was 13 men on the field, what you would have heard about that game is that was one of the greatest comebacks in Grey Cup history. So it's still one of the greatest comebacks in Grey Cup history. Actually, I was telling a couple of the TSN guys that I said, I as you guys discuss this game this week, I said, I know this 13th man's going to come up and talked about. And I said, this really needs to be discussed and talked about. I said, because it's just so overshadowed by, we were down 18 and then just the way we came back, the fourth down conversions, the big time plays that were made, how our defense rose up, even I'll never forget, after we scored, missed a 2-point play. And I can remember Milanovic coming down and saying, hey, Mark asked me to ask you, do we punt or kick off? Do we kick off or onside kick? And I'm like, there was 2 minutes, something like that. I said, you got to kick it deep. You got to pin them and we got to stop them. I said, and then you'll get it back in field goal range. And I said, you got to use the clock the right way because the clock stopped all the time. And that was the trust that Mark had in me. I always stood on the end of the bench, though. I always felt good that at least gave him some good advice for us to have a chance. But we stopped them, and then they punted this unbelievable punt. And then of course we got Mr. Consistent back there, and Brian Bratton, and the ball goes right through his arms. And I think Boulay goes and recovers it remarkably, but the punt went 70 yards. It's now we have to fight our way back. And but I just so many I think with a lot of Ben Cahoons and Watkins and different players that I think Kerry was still with us, but different players that made big plays with Anthony converting the passes and even on third downs and to keep the drives going. And I might have said fourth earlier, but third downs and then getting to that kick. And then, here we are, we're lining up, we're going to win this game. This is unbelievable. And then, then what happens. All you hear about is the 13th man. And I'm like, it's just a shame that that's what you got to hear about in that game. That happened, and we got another kick, but it would just been great if the kick would have gone through the first time. And we hear about the great comeback, and because that was a phenomenal comeback. That's what rings. Of course, that was like an unbelievable feeling, and you're having such a great time, and everybody's jumping all over each other, and we always have a big laugh to this day because it was caught on film. I'm running out there, and I just jumped, just dive on a pile, and the pile moved, and I hit the ground, and I think I broke a rib, man. I couldn't breathe. I'm hurting in the locker room, and we're talking about it days later because what I always see is when the field goal's going through, I see Scott Flory running like a bulldog after the straight ahead. That's what you see as the ball's going through is him running down the field, and of course, we designed a ring with that ball going through the upright, and on the Grey Cup ring. But I just wish, even for Anthony and the history of our team, that it's just discussed about what the great comeback was more than because look, we give them credit. They played very well. We didn't play maybe our best, but everybody says that didn't play our best. They played well, but they played a very good game. They were rolling. I got into that fourth quarter and something changed, which happened several times in Grey Cups for us that we, something always went on in the fourth quarter, either good or bad, and it became a very close game. And so it wasn't historically that happened a lot of times, but the great comeback that's not talked about.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that instance kind of overshot because you're absolutely right. It was such an incredible comeback that unfortunately just doesn't get nearly the attention as does this unfortunate penalties Saskatchewan takes.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to ask you, and again, your perspective on it. In a documentary on TSN, Damon Duval talks about purposely pooching the kick because he saw the flags fly. We've asked several members of this championship organization about that, what they thought of that. I want to know, do you think Damon pooched it on purpose, or is he trying to put one over on us?
I've never heard that ever. I'm not Damon. I mean, Damon answers for himself. If I would say no. I mean, I would sit there, and I've never had this discussion with Damon. Now, could he have been distracted by the flags all going up? Sure. All of a sudden you saw these flags go up before he kicks it. He could have seen that all out of the corner and in peripheral vision, and he might not have kicked his best ball by that. Or even the one he kicked through it was a knuckleball that went through. But I really don't care. He got it through, under even more pressure. Might have got a second chance, but now, you just missed one. You're going to miss a second one, and he kicked a knuckleball that went up and down, as it went through. But he kicked it through, and and Damon, most of the time, as he ever kicked for us, in doing both duties, and he was an All-American in college that did both duties. I mean, he did a great job, majority of the time he was ever, including making that game winner. And but I've never heard that. I mean, I have no idea. I've never heard that one, but it really doesn't matter. I mean, again, if we'd have hit it the first time, we wouldn't have heard anything about it and about the 13th man. And then they had 13 men on the field. So, I mean, that's why the flags go up most of the time in that circumstance. My concern is knowing when all these flags went up, most of the time, it's on the defense. They have too many people, that they were really going to, actually make the call. That was my concern, that they were going to hold the penalty and actually let it go again. Because I could have easily seen them going game over, and then them, the next day be like, hey, yeah, we made a mistake. What would you have done? So they did the proper thing, and it was what was supposed to happen, take place. And unfortunately, the other team didn't, knowing that we did miss it, they could have won if they didn't have that on the field. But like I said, if it made the first time, then I think we'd all heard about the great comeback.
True enough. And the vast majority of Damon's teammates tend not to believe his side of the story. So I guess maybe that'll have to be our 400th episode, is we'll have to have Damon on too.
I don't know, but
to set the record straight.
Bottom line is he made it, and then we won.
That's all that should matter, honestly.
That's all that matters.
As they say, history is written by the winners, right? So
yeah,
there you go.
Jim, you, as a GM, you won 243 games with the Alouettes. Obviously, the Grey Cups, etc. I think the question that a lot of us want to know is, what was the reasoning? What happened in 2017? Why did you leave the Alouettes organization? Or why? I don't. Yeah. Why did you not return to the Alouettes the next season?
Well, there was a press conference being called and saying I was going to be there, and I was told not to be there. So there was a lot of things that were being said that weren't true and what was being told to the media. A lot of things changed within the organization. I love the Wettenhall family. There's a lot of things that were going on, but there was a transition happening. There was a lot of things being done very differently than that was happening. Mr. Wettenhall wasn't running things day to day like he was doing before. There was probably a lot of financial restraints. There was a whole change of way we were going to do things. It started the year before, or maybe 2 years before. But we even won. People don't even know this, but we even went one whole fall without even scouting the NFL teams because we had no budget or money to go scout. There were millions of dollars cut out of the budget in order to operate the proper way. But that was going to be the new way of how things were going to operate. And it didn't matter. We were told it didn't matter what historically we'd been doing, didn't matter what relationships we had. This is how things were going to be done. And, and I had those discussions with Mr. Wettenhall in regards to like, is this how things are going to be? And it was basically, well, got to let somebody, do things the way they want to get it done. And so, again, it's their team, their ownership. That's how they wanted to do things. We started being told, I say we because it's me and the coaching staff, that we don't want to see that player playing anymore. We want to see these players playing. I ended up trading some players that weren't going to play for us anymore. The team didn't understand that. We don't sit there and say that to them, that the owner wants them, sent somewhere or traded, or not with the team anymore. I wasn't going to just cut them. And those were decisions so that other people were going to play, or younger players, or want to see somebody different playing. That's the kind of stuff that was happening. But, when you talk about how we had success and how we scouted and how we went about the business side of it, it was very different. Like I said, we stopped having GM, head coach, owner, president meetings. They weren't happening. The way that we built success and to sustain success changed quite a bit. And never lost the love for any of these people. We've had good talks ever, since. I consider the Wettenhall family as friends of mine, and I respect them. And, I think that as a son of Mr. Wettenhall and one of them taking over the team, it wasn't an easy situation. I think the team was already reeling. These crowds weren't coming in as like they, and you can look on it and go, why'd the crowd stop coming in as much? Well, I can tell you one thing, there was horrendous construction going on downtown. It wasn't even easy for us to get to the stadium and park and get to a game. Something that usually took an hour from our routine ways of getting into the stadium, and for a game took 2.5, 3 hours sometimes. So for a fan, it was very different. So it was more than just winning games all the time, and people, when you built like you have for so long, and we're winning 12, 13, 14 games, and then all of a sudden you're winning 9 games, it's not good enough, and you get spoiled as fans. And then all of a sudden, when you're not winning 9, you're winning 6 or 5 or whatever. Then all of a sudden 9 is good enough, but like when you've built that up for quite a while, then, things, people get used to winning constantly or expect a certain standard. But we never went more than 2 years without ever being in a playoff, or, that's what people don't really see. I mean, we went through I went 22 years there, where 11 times you're in a Grey Cup. I mean, every other year you're in a Grey Cup. I mean, it doesn't mean every other year you're in, but like on the average, and then there's teams that haven't been to a Grey Cup in 15 years. So, that's what, it became a tough time, in a lot of different aspects. So not all of us did everything the proper, like we could have done better. You always can look and criticize and say you could have done something better, or if you had resources to do something a little better. But like, I know when we started having to scout differently, I said, it may not affect this season, but in a year or two, it's going to really affect the team. That's what you got to understand, and people new to the business don't always understand that. They just think it's easy, black and white, or you can just drop somebody in there and say, hey, you're going to keep this coaching staff, but we're going to bring a new coach in and they're going to coach. I said, it doesn't work that way. You better get your Pete. You better get your, I know when we hired Tressman, I told Mr. Wettenhall, you're going to have to pay everybody off, and you let Tressman pick his own staff, because you can't just say, hey, we're going to keep him and him and him because they've been under contract and make him keep them. I said, it doesn't work that way. And they let Mark pick his staff, and he kept Milanovic, the only guy he kept. You go fast forward, and there was times where, okay, we're not going to keep this coach, but the rest of the coaches are staying because we're not paying them off, and we're going to get a coach. Not going to work. And it doesn't work most of the time. It just doesn't work. I don't care if I'm the interim coach or you're bringing somebody new in to make them keep coaches and but a lot of it was financial decisions, in which, when you're running a business and own a business, I mean, it's there's a lot of, people don't understand how much money's involved in football. It's a lot of money. It's not like other sports. There's a lot of expense, traveling the team, equipment, game day operation. I mean, it's a big business. That answer your question?
Yeah. But one thing I want to say as a follow-up, considering what happened to you in 2017, you remember we were talking before about how some players would use this, that, sometimes bulletin board material. Was it kind of your bulletin board material, considering that you ended up winning the Grey Cup?
No, I never.
With another franchise.
No, well, look, I went home and I was not happy. I mean, I wasn't happy how it went down. I wasn't happy how it was portrayed in the media. Like, well, Jim's going to be at the press conference, and then it wasn't there. Like, I wasn't going to be there. I wasn't asked to be there. I was told not to be there. I didn't know what even was going to be said or talked about, and we hadn't even parted ways completely, but we it was mutual. It's time to move on. It's time to go a different direction, and that was hard. I've been there 21 years. I mean, that's like the third, maybe the fifth longest tenure of any GM in any sport in the history of sports in North America. Okay. And a lot of that was, I mean, geez, and if you couple with Baltimore, we're talking 11 Grey Cups, 18 division championships, 22 playoff appearances, I was in the CFL 28 years, and 22 were playoff appearances, so there's all and probably, it got worse, down the stretch. So I get a call out of the blue to go to Toronto. Now, I wasn't happy with the way it departed in Montreal when I left, but there was a lot of undermining, and people, when they start changing, or who they wanted to make the head coach, things really get elaborated, and people start jumping on and, on board of acting like they're going to do something different, or they're the reason, or whatever. And that just naturally happens, and so it's just survival is what it is. It's people are surviving because they're afraid they're going to be the next person gone. So they got, sold a bill of goods of what they thought was going to be the next best thing. And I told them it won't work. And it didn't work. And it wasn't going to work that way. And, I got the call out of the blue for Toronto. I mean, I didn't go looking for it. I get this call, and I get asked to come up, and I'm up there. I was up there a week before I was ever surfaced on I got asked to go to a hockey game, and then next thing you know, people see me, and they're like, why is he, and then they start putting two and two together. But while I'm there, they're asking me, do you think you can get Trestman to come back? And then I'm having those discussions, and I said, I think there's a good chance, and originally he didn't have much interest, and then he, decided that let's do this. And, but if Mark would have not come, then we'd have hired somebody else, but at the time I had the job, and no matter what, and that wasn't an easy situation. They were not a very good team. We still had a lot of blowing the team, and I don't mean to say blow it up, but there's a lot of work that had to be done. We get in there, so many, I think 4 weeks before the draft, or maybe it was 4 weeks after free agency, or 3 weeks after free agent, 4 weeks before the draft. We were having to piece the team together. Of course, I was able to get some players, veteran players, to come in that had been with Mark, been with me, real leaders, guys that could come in, and then added some other players that I traded for that I'd been trying to get, different quarterbacks that I used to have on the neg list, and I lost them off the neg list when I left the league, and then was able to trade back and get people. And then we pieced that thing together, and then we got hot down the stretch, in the back end, and we played our best football in the back end of the season and won the Grey Cup. And then we go into the next season. Unfortunately, Ricky gets hurt, but there was a lot of change that still had to come. But what people totally forget about all that is, after we won the Grey Cup, and even before we won the Grey Cup, the team was sold, and then we were starting over from scratch again. And then then they wanted things done extraordinarily differently than what we just built the whole culture of doing to even win a Grey Cup. And it became a real battle for 2 years. I mean, it was tough. But very grateful for the opportunity. Great people. Really got open my eyes to work with corporate ownership versus individual ownership, which is now I've been working with corporate for 5-6 years. I mean, it was a tremendous experience, and some very professional people. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. But and I think they had to really learn and adjust from their end of, you can't operate a CFL team like you operate an NBA team, or there's a lot of different aspects. You can't. It's not cookie cutter. Just because that's what you do for an NBA. Here, you're going to have to find some housing for these players. Well, we don't do that for NBA teams. Well, you're going to have to for here. That wasn't something they really wanted to do at first, but, they finally adjusted and did all that stuff over a period of time. So, it's always a learning aspect. No matter what happens, I don't care what took place in Montreal with some, with ownership adjusting and changing into a different family member to, selling the team in Toronto. Unless people have the appetite to really be patient and understand and go through it and listen to some degree, and you got to listen to each other, but that's really how you can have success. And so it times it could be very difficult, but yeah, I didn't look at it as a revenge factor. I just looked at it as, when you look at it personally, I looked at it and even Mark and I talked about it. We've had success. Let's make sure other people get to enjoy the success, and so you want to give back and make them try to understand this is how you have success. And you use the avenue of football to help teach people to be better people and why or how you can be successful. And that's an aspect of it that you really enjoy doing as you've had success. Okay. And you may sacrifice some of what you do to help others have success, and, or take the brunt of, some heat or something that as a leader, you have to do it. I mean, it's part of having the job. I mean, it really is, you don't flinch a lot of times when people are asking you questions, but if you're going to have that job, it's a big boy job, big person job. If whoever has a man or woman, then it comes with it. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
Heavy as a head that wears a crown.
So, yeah. So, I mean, it's, in sports, it's like Mike Tomlin right now. It's like Bill Belichick. A lot of it is, what have you done for me lately? Or what have you done recently? I mean, they're great leaders and coaches, and they may not have had as much success as they've had in the past. There's different reasons. There's a lot of aspects to it of having success. And, part of having even a great quarterback, you have your hands part of that. It's, whether Cliffy's talking about, you didn't see that coming with Anthony, I felt it could happen, but until it happens, you don't know. I mean, I could have been criticized just as much as I could have been heralded because it worked out, because that one worked out. And like I said, the more that works out, the better. Then you're looked upon as, oh, you know what you're doing. If some of it doesn't work out, or people put it in the perspective it didn't work out, and they may not know everything to it, they may go, well, you didn't do that very well. Well, there's sometimes there's reasons behind it. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes I can't even get the coach and a player to like each other even after you bring them together. I can't control that. I can try to talk to them, but if they can't see the eye, it may not work out. You got to move on to another, somebody may not want to work with each other for whatever the reasons are. And it doesn't mean either one of them could go different places and still have success. That's the funny thing about this business and sports. So, like I said, I get a lot of thrill out of how many, whether they play for you or they don't, end up having success. That like, okay, I was looking at the right people, whether they're front office people or whether they're players for you.
Could have said it better myself. Wow. Let's talk about your current role right now. Now you're with it was the USFL, but now it's the UFL as they've merged with the XFL. For those that aren't paying attention to spring football for whatever reasons, because I know like some CFL fans are just CFL, that's it. Some people are NFL, that's it. Mm-hmm. Some people embrace the spring league and see the potential in finding the next great football superstars. What is your role right now with the UFL, and how did that come about, and what are you finding the most rewarding about it compared to what you were doing in the CFL?
This landscape keeps changing. It's forever changing. It's difficult to sustain or keep it at a high level. There are a lot of great football players. The CFL gets a lot of players, whether there's a spring football league in the U.S. or not. When there is, they're recruiting those players just like we're all recruiting players that are with NFL teams, because there's so few guys that stick, a turnover in the NFL there, and there's so many guys that come out each year. People don't realize that each year there's 17,000 draft class guys that are coming out of college football, and there's only between the CFL and NFL and then a spring league, maybe 700 guys that are getting drafted, or maybe 600 guys. And so there's a lot of free agents, and then the turnover, but you got to create relationships. You got to scout and do all these things in order, years ahead, sometimes 2 years ahead of time, 1 year ahead of time. You got to stay on you got to keep relationships. You're waiting for people to come free and convince them to come to, whatever league it is. But the spring football league, after I left Toronto, I ended up coaching college football. I was at Alabama State with one of my good friends who used to be a CFL coach, Don Hill-Ely. I was the head coach at Alabama State. He called me out of the blue, and this was COVID year. And we ended up having a spring year when Deion Sanders came into the SWAC conference, and they was all televised, but that was their football season. So I was at Alabama State, and season ended, and then I went to UNC Charlotte, North Carolina, Charlotte, that fall. And I had left Alabama. I was the assistant head coach at the time at Alabama State. And then I went there to be chief of staff, partly because my son was in his last year of college soccer at Charlotte, and I wanted to see him play. So that's why I left Alabama State. But then the season ended, and I get this call from out of the blue from Daryl Johnston. Moose Johnson used to be the fullback for the Dallas Cowboys and blocked for Emmitt Smith. And I didn't know Daryl, and he's telling me about Brian Woods, who's partnered up with Fox Sports to form the USFL. And I heard everything. It excited me. I'm like, and then I had a discussion with both him and Brian Woods, and they were like, "You want to come on board?" Yes. And I took the job, as a whim. And I was there to advise both of them. And then when I got I wasn't even there a week, and then they're telling me, well, we have a draft in a month, 4 weeks. And I said, okay, well, who are you drafting? And they're like, well, we don't have anybody under contract. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So, I'm like on a fourth or fifth generation of a scouting system, and I constantly keep track of all this stuff. And I said, if you let me have control of that, I'll get all that done for you. And so in a matter of 4 weeks, I had 1,600 guys under contract. And we had our draft, and we ended up having the USFL. And so we do that 2 years. The XFL didn't start that year they're supposed to. The next year they started, went through a season. They took some of the players from the USFL, some of the coaches, some of the GMs. And then they obviously were having some financial problems. The two parties, met and decided to merge after 2 seasons of the USFL and 1 year of the XFL, which formed the UFL. And so we've done that for 2 years. And that's been, Fox Sports and Danny Garcia and Dwayne Rock, the Rock Johnson, and Redbird Capital. And so now going into a 5th year, there's Mike Rapoli, who's come in as a ownership, is partnered with that group, and he's become a managing partner, and and going to be running business ops. And now there's been changes that have started happening. As we go through this, we're still trying to figure out, and I'm not, real sure at where this is all going, but it doesn't seem like I'm not sure I'll be a part of what's going on moving forward. At this stage, Daryl's been, not going to be coming back already. And is an ever load of change, but there's a lot of coaches that have not going to have their jobs. They fired. There's been 8 general managers that have been let go of the 8 teams. So it's a whole new process that's being done and re-looked at. And again, I'm sure it's a financial, view of running the league. And again, that's, when you're an owner, you've got to look at that, and they're just looking at it from all different angles. So I hope, whether I'm part of it or not, I hope it survives. I hope it, for a lot of people, it's a lot of jobs for a lot of players. I mean, over the last 4 years, I mean, how many, there's only so many guys that have gotten opportunities in the CFL that are coming each year. I mean, in 4 years, we've had over 1,500 workouts in the NFL. We've had close to 800 players sign contracts from the UFL. Currently there's, I think, between the practice roster and active roster, there's over 50 some players that are on NFL rosters right now that have been with the UFL over the last few years. UFL and Spring League, USFL, XFL. Mm-hmm. So it's been very successful in regards to from the player personnel perspective. It's been very successful of the guys getting opportunities and chances and back and forth. It's been great. We've had some tremendous coaches. Getting people to come into the stands has been a real challenge. It's not the easiest thing. We have great facilities in the UFL. In Arlington, Texas. We're going to change 3 cities. We've had 3 established cities that now don't have a team, and 3 new cities. Those teams that were put together seem to be disbanded. We're still waiting to hear how the draft's going to be, that type of stuff. And so it's kind of starting over again. And so we'll see what direction everything goes in. But I wish nothing, it's been a great time, whether I return or not. And been a great time watching all that happen. And I hope it can continue for football and for players playing. And there's a lot of guys that are actually coming up to the CFL even after the UFL season's over to get more play time or add depth. And but there's some very good football players. I mean, we've got 2 all-pro kickers now. We got an all-pro returner that came out of the UFL and went straight to being all-pro in the NFL. We got several guys starting, leading their team in sacks, and So not just guys making the team, but actually starting and playing very well. So it's, a lot of the stuff like I've been involved with, or even my title's been senior vice president of player personnel for 4 years. It's not advertised out there a whole lot, and it's fine. It's the people that get marketed are the guys like Daryl Johnston, and I get to. It's been Moose has been great to work with. He's I can sit and help advise him, and and give him great advice. And he goes up there and he speaks and stands, and you can watch him every week do NFL games, and he's it's a fun person to work with. You have that collaboration and working. I mean, we'll be buddies forever now. And we didn't know each other, so it's the collaboration's been tremendous, and it's been a lot of fun working with all the different people that I've worked with and getting to know. But they're as this business goes along, and it's different vision, different views, different aspects of stuff, and so we may all go different directions and start doing something else. We'll see what that leads to.
Well, if they want to keep things organized, I mean, you've shown time and time again that you know what you're doing. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not about to tell these guys how to do their job, but I mean, if they want things to stay the way they are, or just keep things steady, if nothing else, then they'd be foolish to not consider you, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it's just, look, everybody has different visions. There, once there's different people in charge and doing things, they, it doesn't mean there's all different kinds of different ways to have success, right? There's different ways there's no one way. There's no certain way to do something, and we all know that. And but different people get in position, and they have a different view of how, or they want their own people. You see it all the time. It doesn't matter whether it's a new owner of a team. It doesn't matter if it's a new athletic director at a university. A lot of times they just want their own people, and start from scratch, and instead of keeping somebody, or they may be thinking, well, I'm gonna change in a year from now anyway. We might as well do it now, and they have every right to. I mean, that's the decisions they're making, and people can judge that in the future or historically, whether it was good or not good, or whether it's just as successful. But we've had a lot of success from a football perspective, and TV ratings, and there's aspects of the business that obviously got to be better and better. It's not always the easiest solution. Like I said, we have this tremendous office complex in Arlington, Texas. We all work out of a building. We have 8 teams in one place. We're practicing all the time. We get on charter flights. We fly to the city and play a game. And you're playing 10 games a year, so you're really in the city 5 days out of the year that you're trying to sell the product. And, and we talk about grassroots and building you're working with your communities and do that. You're juggling. It's you can operate and financially do it this way, but then you're trying to do the other aspect of it. So he's trying to find the balance. And I hope Mike Rapoli, with his business mind, and he's a great entrepreneur, that he can help find a way to sustain, and that can become a bigger business for the UFL, to have success in both aspects of that, on the field and but like what's continued to get the product, the people there has been the product on the field and the viewing audience, because our ratings have been great at, when you're going head to head against anything that's going on in the spring. It's been very good for 4 years. So it doesn't mean it can't be better, but getting more people in the stands and visually seeing that and people watching that, it's going to make a big difference also. And that's got to happen no matter what city you're playing in.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's funny, Jim. How many times have you started these different leagues and teams over and over again?
I was a startup of NFL Europe. World League of American Football was part of that. It was part of the Professional Spring Football League.
The SFL,
I
yep.
was part of the startup of the Baltimore Stallions, Montreal Alouettes, and then you're talking about, the USFL and then the UFL. So what's that? 6 different startups.
Yep.
So, it's always been my thing that I've enjoyed doing it, and why but like I stayed in one place 21 years, so, which was fantastic. That was great. And just sometimes you look back on it and you go, golly, like 21, it's kind of remarkable, but it's also, like unbelievable, like, and then time flies. You're like, where did the time go? Like, this is crazy that, that I was in one place that long. And, so when you go through that, obviously you're going to have ups and downs, and it's not always going to be the greatest thing. I mean, like, but for me to be that long for that long a period, it was good for a long time, because you wouldn't have been asked to stay or retained or kept. And, if you weren't able to do stuff. And look, you go through all that kind of stuff, and you have, like I said, you have different views, different visions. And again, sometimes financial stuff just is the number one thing, and it doesn't matter how you've done something. It's like something's got to change, or this business isn't going to work. But taking it from the product on the field, and you're winning. If you can't win, or you're not going to have the product on the field, then the other aspects of the business, it's not going to work. You got to still put the product on the field, so you can start taking away from the product to put on the field. And if that's not working, it's not going to work. It just isn't going to work. And that's where sometimes I think it gets skewed when people are going. But like, you got to all be on the same page. You got to. It doesn't mean you got to agree upon everything, but like, when you close the door and you come out, this is what we're doing. It doesn't work, we'll try something else, and you work together. But if you can't see eye to eye, and it's just or it's just adamant we're not doing stuff, then that's what I said. You got to make a decision. You got to make sense. Do I want to be a part of this? And and I can look back on stuff, and I don't regret anything, but I can look back and go, well, I probably should have left 5 years ago, or I shouldn't have continued doing it, because the odds are it wasn't going to work out. It wasn't going to get back. You have hopes it is. You have visions that it's going to. You got, maybe you can think, oh, I'm going to get this person to understand.
Out of curiosity, and all the time that you were with the Alouettes, what's the longest contract you ever signed officially?
I think it was 5 years, which, people don't get 5-year contracts. No, they don't get them. As a matter of fact, when I had to sell my house and move to North Carolina, we had already hired Tressman, and then, people don't really know this story, but like, I had a year left on my contract. All my kids, several of my kids were going into kind of the high school type stuff in Montreal. They were learning both languages. I always had concern if we had to move back to the States, that my kids would be up to speed with English teaching. I always wanted my kids to go to go to high school in the U.S. to go through that experience. It's just different being in a community, and that type of experience for high school football. I wanted them to experience that. But what happened is, Mr. Wettenhall, we were negotiating a contract, and it's been going on for like 4 months, and it just wasn't getting anywhere. And I'm like, Mr. Wettenhall, I've been given a deadline by one of the sports academies in Montreal that they got to have my money. And I said, I don't want a penny raise. I want nothing. But I said, if I'm going to send one child here, I want them all to go here. But really, I just want to make sure my kids can go through school at this academy, and and be up to speed on everything. And if not, I said, I may have to move the family back to the U.S. Well, he goes, well, why don't you do that anyway? He goes, we're letting Tressman do it. And I said, I looked at him, I said, what? I said, well, first of all, we don't have to or need to move back to the U.S. My wife loves it here. We've got great friends. And I said, my best friend lives next door to me, that I'm to this day, one of my best friends that I stay in touch with, the family. And I said, we love it here. So I said, we don't have to. He goes, Jim, I really highly suggest you do this. And he says, you can live wherever you want. I'm not telling you where to live, but like if I were you, he goes, why don't you go home and let your parents be around those grandkids? And I went, Bob, I'm like, you know what this entails? I got a house. I said, I have to sell it. And we just couldn't come to an agreement. It was the craziest thing. And then I'm like, let's put the house on the market. We're being, like, we're forced. I said, I don't know where this is going. And then next thing you know, I think Herb Zukowski reports that my house is on the market. He makes it a public thing. Of course, he lived out there. He lived out where and he'd take walks and walk by my house. It's like he was every day. He was monitoring or something.
God, sounds awful.
And next thing you know, it's a public thing. Well, my house sells. So, all right, well, the house is sold. And like, I move home. And 2 weeks after I move home, I get a 5-year contract. And I go home and I'm around I'm back at, I actually never thought I'd be able to, but I got to move back into the home I grew up in. It was this great size home for my kids. I live right next to the high school in my hometown. My parents wanted me to, I bought them a house attached to the property. And 8 months later, my mom passes, and another 6 months after that, my dad does. And it was like unbelievable. We moved there, then they passed, but they got to spend that time, a short period. And then, what people don't see with this business is like, it's one thing to live in town. Like I can be in town all the time and not live there, during the season, but in the off season, I'm not in town anyway. I'm not with my family. I'm scouting. I'm down in the States. I'm running around everywhere. I may come home for a weekend. I'm back out. People have no idea because the Alouettes aren't in the eye of the public. You're not, you may have one event here and a town hall there and you're there, but like, you're not, you're really not there in the off season. So I'm really not there, like 20, living all those years in Montreal. I mean, in the off season, I'm not there most of the time anyway. So being in the States, you're around everywhere and I can get anywhere within a flight in 2 hours and scout half the United States and, versus coming from Montreal, you have so much more access to stuff. And then if I needed to come back, fly 2 hours and do something, you could do it. But see, people didn't see that aspect of it. They didn't understand all that kind of stuff. And, we did that. And, but yeah, I mean, the owner wanted and said, you should do this. This is what you should do. And because that's how much he cared for my family. He cared for my family and my kids to get everything that we were talking about and proper. And he wanted them, and he wanted my parents. He saw how close. And and when my mom passed, Mr. Wentenhall had a private jet pick up about 10 Alouettes and brought them to the funeral along with him. When my dad passed, did the exact same thing. Had no idea. And he brought he flew him down, attended the funeral and flew back. People don't do that. That's how much he cared for my family, and cared for us. And so I hate that we ended my tenure there the way it did. I don't think it ever should have ended that way. It shouldn't have come to that. We could have easily finished a contract out. We could easily said, hey, this is the next way we're going in the future of doing stuff. And it just wasn't handled that way. That's where it wasn't handled, should have been done a totally different way, and, but, as time goes, I don't hold that against any of their family. I love I know Bob's passed, but Bob Jr. and Andrew and their families, I have a lot of care for them. It was unbelievable going to his, celebration of life, and it's seeing all the different people that he had touched in a lot of the same ways, but in totally different aspects. It had nothing to do with sports. How everybody had similar stories and how he treated people, and he was just unbelievable, special human being. That the Alouettes are just very fortunate they ever had an owner like that cared for people, and and the players that got to know him well, and they know that, and so Bob and I, even after I left there, small period of time went by, but we would talk off and on. I saw him, we would had conversations, and I knew the day Andrew Wetnall called me, I knew something had happened. I actually was down at his hotel he has in West Palm, in Florida, right after COVID had hit. I had traveled down by car, and I was there, and I went by, and they were redoing the hotel, and I'm like, I had called and texted Bob. I was trying to get a hold of him. I wouldn't get an answer, and I'm like, did they sell this, or something's wrong? And sure enough, I learned how bad off he was. He wasn't even able to return calls probably the last 6 months of his life. It was tough. And but boy, I had some great laughs with him and after games, and he always made you feel good, win or lose. He made you feel good, important. He wanted to sit and have a nice discussion, and you get into the weeks, but there was very few times ever in my relationship with him that we ever couldn't work out or come out to eye and understand one another, or understand what was really going on. It was a special bond, it really was.
I believe it. I remember too, like just having even just brief conversations, like nothing compared to what you no doubt had with him, but even just those brief moments, like he was there, he was invested in you, and like, how are you doing? How is that? And just just a tremendous human being for sure.
Yeah, he was special. And then when they had the celebration of life, that was really something. Seeing all these different people that he employed or worked with, or relatives that, you'd sit and talk, and it was just like remarkable. Like he was the same person to everybody in a different way, in a different aspect or business outside of being the sport aspect of it. It was really, really interesting. But he cared for people.
You have, Jim, given that so much more lore, not only to your legacy. I hope people have learned a lot also about Mr. Wetnall, because I only got to meet him once at one of the Alouettes functions. It was an honor, obviously. But to you, for all the times that you were in Montreal, I know Alouettes Nation appreciates you. I know we do here specifically, because you were here for our 300th episode, and we could talk for hours, Jim, even more than we currently have. But that being said, we want to thank you wholeheartedly for joining us, for giving us your time, for helping reminisce and talk about your career with the Alouettes, and more that you've done, more than what you've done. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, Jim.
I thank you so much for having me on, and for us to have this conversation. And you ever want to have me back on for just the one particular subject or something, I'm available anytime for you. And but I appreciate you too. Congratulations for 3,000. That's remarkable, and to be that loyal to the Alouettes, and to have that, and it's great to see the success they've been having, and looks like getting back some of that same culture we were able to have for a lot of years, and seems like they have a quarterback to build with for a while, and the several people, I sent them all a message going into the Grey, congratulating them heading into the Grey Cup, that we're all part of that, the years we were there, that are part of that, and that's fun to see. And but again, Montreal's a second home to me. It always will be. I have tremendous memories, and I want to be a part of the CFL legacy at all times, and especially the Alouettes. So, but I thank you for having me on, and wish you guys the best and happy holidays, and and enjoy your next segment, 3001.
Well,
Well, 300, but okay.
Oh,
Hey, listen,
301. I'm sorry.
but still.
But so
see,
you'll be.
see, this is what I'm thinking about now too. It's like, oh gosh, how am I going to? How is 301 going to? It's not even going to come close comparing to this.
You'll
We'll
always,
try.
You'll
We'll
always
try.
have some good people.
Yeah,
and-
Jim, we really appreciate your time. We appreciate what you did here for the city, for the franchise, and obviously, from you are part of how Montreal Alouettes football became what it is today, and everybody in Alouettes Nation and in the city of Montreal and in the province of Quebec. We cannot do anything but thank you, because I know you were a part of the process, but that you were a huge part of it, Jim. And again, we can't thank you much anymore.
Hey, thank you. It's been an honor to be a part to historically to even, sit here for you to even be talking to me, that I had such a large part of, being a part of all that. And, you're blessed and fortunate. You look on it and you're like, how things could have been different if someone made a different decision, that, whether you're allowed to be a part of it. So, people, a lot of people have taken chances on me, and, and I hopefully have on most occasions it's paid off, that we were able to work together and have some success together. So it's always fun, when you have success. But gentlemen, thank you so much for having me on. And I it was great to be able to have the time to talk to you as long as we did. And I apologize again for getting on so late. So, but
Well worth it.
Here for you.
It's a part of now our 300 episode lore. If people only knew, that's the thing. So
there you go.
Thank you very much, Jim. We
Take
really
care of
appreciate it.
yourself. All the
I
best.
appreciate you, Jim.
All right. Have a good night.
Take care.
So, if you are listening to us now, first and foremost, what did you think of it? What did you think of the interview with Jim Popp? As I had said to you pre-show, Cliff, and many times after we did the interview, the insight that we found out about Jim Popp, the names he dropped, the answers that he was able to give, find out what we did about, if you did not know much about former Alouettes owner Bob Wetenhall, what he specifically meant to this franchise, you know a hell of a lot more now. And now knowing what I do, I think both of us had the chance to meet Bob when he was alive. It means even more, because I can say that I've learned things about other people, and I have not met them. I wasn't able to meet them while they were alive, and it hurts just to say that I was able to meet Bob when Mr. Wetenhall. The one time that I did was well worth it. And Jim, what can I say? There's just so much within this interview itself that I hope everybody takes away at least one thing that you did not know. And if we are able to do that, that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, I think that if that's the case, then yeah, this was 100% a success. And yeah, I think I'm kind of curious. I know a lot of our listeners, the Montreal-based listeners, they've been following the team pretty much the same time we started, like when they came back in '96. But there's a lot of fans, I think, that are relatively new to the Montreal Alouettes. They're new to Alouettes Nation. They're just discovering who this team is. And to me, like, this was a great learning lesson, a great bit of history, if you will.
Yeah.
Again, you may, especially if you just started watching the Alouettes, say, like, in the 2020s, for example, like when they, started back to, being a championship caliber football team. You may not know what Jim Popp is, and how he came about, and how he basically built this franchise to what it is today. I mean, regardless of the incredible job Danny Machocha has done in building this current roster, it doesn't happen unless Jim Popp was on board beforehand and basically was setting the foundation for what this Alouettes team is today. And I'm starting to see now a lot of the same parallels to that time era of when Bob Wetenhall and Jim Popp were basically running this city.
More so than what we thought, by the way. More so than what we thought.
Bigly. But now you look at today with Pierre-Karl Pelledo and Danny Machocha, basically assuming those roles now for this current generation of Alouettes fans. Like, if you're happy with how this team is built right now, after listening to this interview, I think you're going to realize just how it all came to be, how we got to this point where we are right now. So yeah, I sincerely hope each and every one of you really took the time to listen and appreciate everything that Jim had to share with us. I mean, it was an adventure, folks. I mean, this was absolutely incredible. The fact that we got so much of his time and his energy and everything about it, it was just tremendous. We cannot thank Jim Popp enough for coming in and being a part of our 300th episode, folks. 300 episodes. He was blown away by that too, which is great. I mean, that kind of support and appreciation is tremendous. I mean, you really can't put a price tag on that. So once again, thank you so much to Jim Popp for joining us on our 300th episode of the Alouettes Flight Deck. And yeah, we're going to have him back on again. I feel like we talked so much with him. Yeah. And I still feel like there's a lot more that we've yet to uncover, as crazy as that sounds.
Oh no, I agree. And for those of you who listen to the podcast, to the interview itself during the show and said, well, I don't know this or I don't know that. If you haven't been listening to us the entire time and you're just joining us for the Jim Popp episode, go back and listen to some of the references that we made. Go back and listen to that special that we did for the 25th anniversary of the U2 game. If you don't know much about the U2 game, there's so much within that itself. It's like, this one interview is able to branch off into many different ways, and it actually makes a ton of references to a lot of the shows and a lot of the interviews that we've done over the past 10 seasons. So, it sounds like a playlist that Tim needs to make. 6 degrees of Jim Popp. I mean, listen, you never know. Let's branch that timeline.
Well, listen, we've got 10 seasons now of archival footage and stuff that we can use. Why not? Why not make a sort of a playlist, for lack of a better term, like just something sort of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a starter pack for new Alouettes fans to really understand the history of this franchise. Like it goes far beyond, what you may have seen over the past couple of years. I mean, this franchise has been around for close to 30 years. And yeah, there's a lot to delve into here.
A media packet. There we go.
Okay. That works.
Yeah. Want to remind everybody we're on socials. You can find us anywhere. If you want to find us over on X or Blue Skies over at Alouettes FlightDeck, Facebook over at Alouettes FlightDeck Pod, and Instagram and YouTube over at Alouettes FlightDeck. Speaking of YouTube, you will find the broadcast version of the show. You will find the audio version also, but you will also find our very popular post-game show, Flight Deck Live. It may be done for the 2025 season, but you can still go back and check it in archives and see what we did all season, including the coverage that we did, where we did 2 shows, a pre and a post-game show from Grey Cup this year. Speaking of YouTube, make sure you like it. Make sure you hit the bell button and set your notifications to let you know when we go live or when a new show will become available. Also, want to listen to any portions of of our archive? Well, you can do so at www.alouettsflightdeck.ca. If you're also looking to rep some merch, whether it be for the holidays or whether you need something leading up to training camp, the new season, head over to flightdeckgear.ca. Pick up something with our logo on it. Something from the If You Know, You Know line. Cartoon Bear 56, Le Big Mac. They're all there. And we're expecting more to pop up over the off season. So just stay tuned. Also, we would not have been able to do this season if it hadn't been our partner over at Royal Retros. If you go to royalretros.com and use the code FlightDeck at checkout, you'll save 10% off your entire order. And yes, they are available, but in short demand. You will need to DM us if you want one, if you haven't got one already. But the collaboration that we did with Pinforce on our logo pins and our Cartoon Bird 56 pins, there are, I said, a limited number available. You can go ahead and DM us, and we will get them out to you. $10 each, and the money is still going towards the CFL fans fight cancer. Also, because of our collaboration, if you head over to their site, if you like pins when it comes to comic books, Arena Football League, and many more, head over to their site. Go to pinforce.io, use the code FlightDeck at checkout until the end of the year, and you will save 15% off your entire order. It was a ride. We were exhausted after doing the show last night, and it is just exhausting in a good way. Thinking about this interview itself that we did, and I hope everybody, as I said already, I hope everybody came away with at least one new thing you did not know, either about Jim Popp, the Alouettes, or the former ownership group.
Yeah, and folks, again, especially if you're on YouTube, leave a comment leave a comment below. Let us know what you think. What was your favorite part of the interview? What did you learn? If you took anything new from this interview, let us know what you thought, because we want to hear it. I mean, listen, Tim and I were for better part of 3 hours. We were blown away by everything we got to learn. So we want to know what you learned. We want to know what you took away from this. So by all means, folks, hit us up in the comments. Reach us on socials. You know where to find us. I mean, we want to hear what you think of this, because this was, as far as I'm concerned, a truly outstanding interview, a worthy interview for number 300 here.
Exactly. And as we mentioned before at the top of the show, there will be at least there will be a 301 this year, and there will and potentially another one. But we can say that coming up. Stay tuned to our socials, because as we have done almost every year for our final show, for our season finale, it will be a live show where we get you to chime in about what happened during the 2025 season. So we will.
There's actually some news that has been happening, folks, and yes,
oh really?
We do want to talk about it. Yeah. I know. I'm surprised too, but we will be talking about this news on the next episode. So again, you see our socials. You know where to find us. If you're not subscribed, do so right now. Get notified when we go live or when we drop another episode. So be ready, because as Tim said, we're not done yet. This 10th season isn't over just yet. We appreciate everybody who's listened to the show and come this far and being able to hear us talk. We just love doing it. So we will see you guys next episode. So for the final time tonight, for everybody here at the Alouettes FlightDeck, for Cliffy D, I'm Tim Capper. We're on Final Approach.
Take off!